Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Super Harry. In today's episode, we explore, what if ancient ritual at age 2 showed Harry was 45% Fae and Dumbledore harvesting Fae blood? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Rite of Blood and Bone. The Fae don't die quietly. Elindra had lived for 412 years, which was not particularly old by the standards of her kind, but long enough to have watched 3 magical ages rise and collapse into the one that followed. Long enough to have learned that the things worth doing were rarely the things that were safe to do. She found the cottage in Godric's Hollow the way she found most things, by following the resonance. Magic leaves trails the way water leaves channels, worn grooves in the fabric of the world that older senses can read like text. The child inside that cottage had been leaving a trail since the moment of his birth, a thread of light in the ether so vivid and so strange that Elindra had spent an entire year convincing herself she was misreading it. She hadn't been misreading it. The night was the 31st of July, 1982. Harry Potter had been alive for exactly 2 years, and his parents were throwing him a birthday party that involved a great deal of conjured balloon animals and a cake shaped like a broomstick, and neither of them had any idea that the woman standing outside their garden gate was not precisely a woman. Elindra looked human enough when she chose to. Brown skin, silver-streaked hair worn loose to her shoulders, a coat that was slightly too elegant for the warm summer evening. What she could not quite disguise, even now with her power failing, was the quality of stillness she carried, the absolute absence of the small unconscious movements that humans made, the constant fidgeting of mortality. She stood at that gate like something painted there. She knocked anyway. Lily Potter opened the door with chocolate frosting on her wrist and the particular expression of someone expecting either a neighbor or a problem. She got neither. She stood in the doorway looking at Elindra for a long moment, and then something shifted in her face, a recognition that didn't come from memory but from somewhere older than memory. Blood speaking to blood across the threshold. "Oh," said Lily softly. "You're one of them." "Your grandmother knew what she was," Elindra said. "She chose not to tell your mother. Your mother chose not to know. You have been left without the knowledge you were owed." She paused. "I am here to correct that, and to do one other thing. After tonight I will be unable to do anything at all, so if you would let me in, I would appreciate the use of the remaining hours." Lily stepped back from the door. James Potter was less immediately accommodating. He came out of the sitting room with Harry balanced on his hip and frosting on his cheek and the immediate bristling awareness of a trained aura recognizing that something was different about this visitor in a way he couldn't articulate. "Lily," he said, and his tone was a question. "It's all right," Lily said, and she sounded like she was still processing whether it was. Elindra looked at the child on James Potter's hip and stopped moving entirely. Even by her standards. Harry Potter looked back at her with enormous green eyes and an expression of absolute concentration, the way very small children sometimes look when they are encountering something their instincts recognize as important before their minds have developed the vocabulary to name it. He had a smear of chocolate cake on his chin. He had, Elindra now saw with the full force of her perception, a thread of light woven into every cell of his small body that blazed like a signal fire in the dark. "May I hold him?" she asked. James Potter's arms tightened. "Please," Elindra said. "I need to tell you both what you are looking at. And what has been done with that knowledge by someone who should not have it." They sat in the Potter's kitchen while Harry, apparently indifferent to the gravity of the occasion, ate the remains of his birthday cake and periodically tried to interest Elindra in a toy dragon that breathed real smoke. She let him press it into her hands with the solemnity it deserved. James made tea. The night was warm through the open window and somewhere outside a real owl called twice and went silent. Elindra told them about Lily's grandmother, a woman named Ira Evans, who had been born in Wales in 1891 to a mother who never entirely explained her heritage and a father who had learned not to ask. Ira had manifested small Fae gifts all her life, an ability to sense the emotional truth of any room, a voice that carried a resonance that made people stop arguing, plants that grew wild and excessive under her hands. She had married a muggle and her daughter had been fully human, and somewhere in the line the blood had thinned and gone quiet. Until Harry. In children with strong magical cores, dormant bloodlines can re-express, Elindra explained. Particularly when the magical parents are both powerful, as you both are. The blood finds the channel it needs. In this child, she nodded at Harry, who was now using the toy dragon to steer his cake crumbs into a pile. The Fey blood did not merely re-express. It compounded. What Ira Evans carried, what your mother never manifested, what you yourself carry in trace amounts, she looked at Lily, in him it has concentrated. Significantly. How significantly? James asked. The rite will tell us exactly, Elindra said. But by my reading of him, which has been consistent for a year, he is carrying Fey heritage at a ratio I have not seen in a half-blood child in 2 centuries. 40 to 50% of his core is resonating on Fey frequencies. The rest is wizard standard, but that rest is already exceptional. She folded her hands on the table. He will be extraordinary. He already is. But he needs to know what he is, and he needs the old knowledge, and he needs, she paused, protection from those who might wish to use what he is before he has the chance to understand it himself. The kitchen was quiet except for Harry scraping his fork across his plate in a pattern that was, Lily realized with a slight chill, geometrically perfect. A child his age shouldn't have been able to do that. Who? James said, and his voice had gone flat and professional. Who already knows? Elindra looked at him for a long moment. Let us do the rite first, she said. Then I will tell you everything I know. You will want to be sitting down for the second part. The rite itself was simple in the way that the oldest things were simple, not uncomplicated, but stripped of everything unnecessary. Elindra moved the kitchen table aside and drew a circle on the floor tiles in something that was not quite chalk and not quite light, a line that seemed to exist slightly out of phase with the physical world. She set 4 points around the circle, each marked with a word in Old Fey that Lily looked at and felt the edge of meaning without quite catching it. The words for truth and blood and recognition and name. Harry watched all of this with the focused attention he'd been giving it all evening. When Elindra beckoned him into the circle, he walked to her without hesitation, with the steady gait of a child who has already decided the world is largely trustworthy while also keeping mental notes. This won't hurt him? Lily asked from the edge of the circle. The truth never hurts the one it's naming, Elindra said. It only hurts the ones who were hoping for a different answer. She pricked her own finger, and here both James and Lily saw clearly, for the first time, that the blood that welled up was not quite the right color, too luminous, carrying a faint silver tint that caught the kitchen light strangely. She pressed that finger to Harry's forehead, above and between his eyes, and said a single word in Old Fey that seemed to take up more space than the kitchen had available for sound. The circle lit up. Not dramatically. Not with the showy explosive magic of dueling or combat. It lit the way dawn does, gradually and then all at once, the lines Elindra had drawn rising from the floor and hovering at waist height, glowing with a soft, fierce silver green that was the exact color of Harry's eyes in the right light. The 4 marker words blazed separately. The one for name blazed longest. Harry looked down at the circle around his feet with an expression of quiet wonder, and then looked up at Elindra, and his eyes in the circle's light were not quite the eyes of a 2-year-old. Elindra read what the circle showed her. Her face, which had been composed through all of it, did something complicated. 45%, she said quietly. Exactly 45. Lily made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I have not seen this in my lifetime, Elindra continued, and her voice had an edge of something that might have been awe. At this concentration, with a magical core of this magnitude, he will not simply manifest Fey gifts alongside wizarding magic. The two will compound. Each will amplify the other. What he becomes, she shook her head slightly. There is no historical precedent I can point you to. You will simply have to watch and be prepared to be astonished. She lifted Harry out of the circle and handed him back to Lily, who held him perhaps too tightly for a moment. Harry patted her cheek with one small hand, which was the most he had to offer by way of comfort and was, in the moment, sufficient. Then Elindra said, "Now I need to tell you about Albus Dumbledore." She told them everything she knew, which was not everything there was to know but was more than enough. She had been watching Dumbledore for years, watching with the interest of a predator observing another predator, recognizing ambition shaped into the clothing of benevolence. She had seen him research, in the restricted archives of 3 different magical institutions, the theory of a Fey blood ward. A working so old that most wizarding scholars dismissed it as legend. A dome of compelled harmony that, if properly constructed, would overlay all of magical Britain with a resonance that made conflict neurologically impossible. Not persuasion. Compulsion. An end to all magical conflict through the permanent alteration of every magical person's capacity for it. That sounds, James said carefully, almost noble. It would be the end of free will for every magical person in Britain, Elindra said. It would make them peaceful the way a lobotomy makes a person peaceful. It would also require, for its anchoring, blood of sufficient Fey concentration. The quantity required and the purity required. She looked at Harry in Lily's arms. In all the time since this ritual was theorized, there has been perhaps one child in a generation who could theoretically serve as the anchor. Dumbledore has been researching this for 20 years. He has never found a viable candidate. The silence in the kitchen stretched until James said, very quietly, "Until now." "He does not have what he needs yet," Elindra said. "The child is 2 years old. The ritual requires the blood to be offered by a being old enough to have manifested the gifts. He would need to wait, and he would need access, and he would need the child to remain unaware of what he carries, because a Fey-blooded person of this concentration who fully understands their own nature cannot be harvested without their consent. The magic will not allow it." She paused. "Which means his entire strategy depends on the boy never learning the truth of what he is." Lily looked at her son. Harry had fallen asleep in her arms sometime in the last few minutes, heavy and warm and completely trusting, his small fingers loosely curled. His eyelashes made crescents on his cheeks. He looked like exactly what he was, a 2-year-old who had eaten too much birthday cake and stayed up too late. He also looked, in the residual light of the right circle fading from the kitchen floor, like something much older and much more powerful temporarily inhabiting the shape of a 2-year-old. Like potential, breathing. "What do we do?" Lily asked. "You document everything I have told you tonight," Elindra said. "You create records and you hide them in places Dumbledore cannot access. You teach your son, as he grows, to trust his own perception over anyone else's interpretation of it. The Fey blood will tell him true things, if he learns to listen to it. It will show him when he is being lied to. It will show him when he is being used." She stood from the table, and for the first time James and Lily saw the exhaustion in her, old and deep, the exhaustion of something that has been holding on past its time. "I came tonight because I could not leave without giving him this. The right of recognition. The knowledge of his name." She looked at the sleeping child. "He will need it. I am sorry I will not be here to give him more." She was at the door when James said, "What do you mean, you won't be here?" Elindra smiled, and it was the particular smile of someone for whom the next step is already decided. "I told you," she said, "that after tonight I would be unable to do anything at all." She touched the doorframe lightly, feeling the wood. "I have perhaps 2 weeks. Possibly 3. I have been," she paused, searching for the right word, "unwell for some time. I wanted to do this before the end. I wanted him to have a record of what he is." She looked over her shoulder. "Keep him safe. Keep him knowing himself. Those 2 things are harder to do simultaneously than they sound, but they are the only things that matter." She walked out into the Godric's Hollow night and did not look back. James and Lily stood in their doorway watching her go, and neither of them said anything for a long moment because there was nothing adequate to say. A moth bumped against the porch light above them. Somewhere down the street, someone's dog was barking at something. Neither of them went to Dumbledore. They sat up until 3 in the morning writing down every word Alyndra had said. James went to Gringotts the next day and rented a vault in Harry's name and sealed the documentation with a fey-resonant blood lock Lily designed herself, one that would only open for Harry or for his blood, and not for any proxy. 12 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days later, Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow and killed them both. Dumbledore arrived at the cottage at 20 past midnight. The dark mark still hung over the house, green and obscene against the October sky. The street had that peculiar post-catastrophe silence, the kind that follows violence so sudden and so complete that the neighborhood hasn't yet processed that it needs to react. Somewhere Hagrid was coming, or already nearby. Dumbledore could feel the broad warm signature of his magic. He had perhaps 15 minutes. He stepped over the rubble of the front door. The house was worse inside than outside. The stairs were partially collapsed. The sitting room ceiling had come down in sections. Voldemort's magic had not been surgical, it rarely was. James Potter was in the front hall, crumpled the way only the dead are crumpled, with the total limpness of a body that has stopped having opinions about gravity. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment and then moved past. He found Harry in the upstairs nursery, sitting in the ruins of his crib, dusty and wide-eyed and entirely unharmed in any conventional sense. The scar on his forehead was livid, not bleeding but deeply marked, already darkening at the edges. He looked up at Dumbledore with those enormous green eyes and said nothing. Lily was between the crib and the door. She had died throwing herself forward. Dumbledore stood in that nursery for nearly a minute, and whatever he felt in that minute, grief, or guilt, or something that was neither but lived in the same neighborhood, he did not let it interfere with what he did next. He had trained himself, over decades, to feel appropriate things and then set them aside when the larger necessity required it. It was the gift and the damage of being a person who thought in terms of larger necessities. He took out a very small vial. It was old enough that the glass had the slight bluish tint of early manufacturing, old enough that the stopper was real cork rather than rubber. He had been carrying it for 3 years, since the night Alyndra had performed the rite in this very house. He hadn't been inside, but he had been close enough, in the shadows of the Godric's Hollow lane with a disillusionment charm and a directional sensing spell, to read the output of that circle. He had seen the number. 45%. He had made a sound in the dark that he would not have wanted anyone to hear. He knelt beside Harry, who watched him with that eerie unblinking attention he had always had. "Hello, Harry," Dumbledore said gently. "Do you know who I am?" Harry didn't answer. He was 18 months old, technically, and had seen his parents killed an hour ago, and was sitting in the wreckage of his life with a cut on his forehead, and he looked at Dumbledore with the expression of someone who was receiving information and categorizing it very carefully before deciding what to do with it. Dumbledore touched the scar with one finger, just a fingertip, just for a moment, and murmured 3 words under his breath. The vial in his other hand flickered with the faintest silver-green light, barely visible, there and gone. Harry flinched. Not from pain, from something more like the sensation of something being taken. Dumbledore pocketed the vial. "You're safe now," he told the child. "You'll be safe. I promise you that." He gathered Harry up carefully, the way you hold something precious and fragile, and he meant it, both things at once, that Harry was precious to him, and that what he had just done was the first in a long series of thefts he had already decided were necessary. He had made his calculation. He had decided the smaller wrong was justified by the larger right, the way he always did. He had decided he knew better. He had no way of knowing, as he carried Harry Potter out of the wreckage of Godric's Hollow and into the cold October air, that James Potter had been to Gringotts. That there was a vault. That the vault existed precisely to outlast the moment Dumbledore was now engineering. He had no way of knowing that the magic he had just stolen from that child was already, on some level too deep for his instruments to measure, aware of what had been taken from it, and keeping score. 9 years later. The number 4 Privet Drive was a house that had declared war on individuality and won decisively. Everything about it was relentlessly average, the trim lawn, the clean windows, the correct flowers, the car in the drive that was exactly as nice as the neighbors' cars but not nicer, which would have been embarrassing. The Desleys had constructed their entire lives around the principle that nothing unusual should ever happen to them or near them or in their general vicinity, and for the most part the universe had respected this arrangement. The universe was currently reconsidering. Harry Potter was in the garden. He was nominally weeding. He'd been assigned weeding every Saturday for as long as he could remember, weeding and scrubbing and cooking and any other task that could plausibly be described as building character while also being things that Vernon and Petunia didn't want to do themselves. He was used to it. He was 10 years old and it had been his life for 9 of those years and he had long since stopped being upset about it in any productive way. Being upset about it didn't change the weeding. What he was actually doing, with his hands in the dirt and the summer sun on the back of his neck, was paying attention. Not to the garden. To the thing that had been happening more frequently over the past few months, the thing he had no name for and no explanation of, the thing that felt like, the only way he'd been able to describe it to himself was that it felt like weather, but inside, like being able to feel which direction the emotional wind was blowing from. He could feel, right now, that Petunia was agitated about something to do with money and that the agitation was pointed at Vernon who was in the sitting room and not feeling it yet. He could feel that Dudley, upstairs, was bored and that the boredom was the specific flavor that preceded meanness. He could feel something else, vaguer and more persistent, that he'd been feeling for weeks, a sort of pressure, like a sound just below hearing, like something being slowly and steadily pulled out of him one drop at a time. That last one bothered him most. Because it wasn't coming from the Desleys. It was coming from the house itself. Or rather, from the something woven into the house, something that existed at a layer of reality he couldn't see but could absolutely feel, the way you can feel a draft through a wall even when you can't see the gap. He pulled a weed and held it for a moment, thinking. He'd started noticing the pulling sensation around his 8th birthday, though in retrospect he thought it had probably been happening longer and he'd simply developed the sensitivity to notice it. It was small. It was consistent. It was rhythmic, almost. He could feel it most clearly in the early morning, before he was fully awake, before the noise of the house started up. A gentle, persistent theft of something he didn't have a name for. His magic, maybe. He had magic. He'd known that for years, in the way that you know things that no one has confirmed but that the evidence makes unmistakable. Things happened around him that didn't happen around other people. Accidental things that turned out to be useful. He'd learned not to mention them. He pulled another weed and thought about the letter he'd gotten last week, the one Vernon had snatched away before he could read past the first line. He'd seen enough to know it was from somewhere called Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, which confirmed that the magic was real and not a thing he'd imagined, and that someone somewhere thought he should be educated in it. He'd also, in the moment Vernon's hand closed over the envelope, felt a sudden sharp spike in the pulling sensation, as if the letter itself had been feeding it, or been designed to. He'd thought about that for days afterward. His magic had also reacted to the letter, but differently. Reacted with something that felt like recognition. Like a sleeping thing briefly waking. Now, in the garden, with his hands in the warm earth, Harry Potter closed his eyes and tried something he'd been building toward for months. He stopped trying to ignore the pulling sensation and started trying to trace it. Follow it backward, the way you'd follow a thread. Where was it coming from? What was it connected to? The answer came with surprising clarity. It was woven into the foundations. Into the actual structure of the house's magical protections, as integrated as the mortar between the bricks. It had been there since before he could remember. It was extraordinarily well made, whomever had built it, complex in a way that suggested both great skill and the assumption that no one would ever have sufficient sensitivity to notice it. They'd been wrong about that. Harry sat back on his heels in the dirt and opened his eyes and looked at the house with an expression that was not frightened and was not angry. It was simply attentive. Processing. Someone had built something into this house that was slowly taking from him. Someone with significant magical ability. Someone who had access to the house's protections. Someone who had wanted him here. He was 10 years old and he'd had 9 years of being treated like a problem to be managed and a resource to be used, and those 9 years had built in him a very efficient threat recognition system. He didn't feel panicked by this information. He felt the clean, cold click of things making sense. He looked at his hand, just his hand, ordinary looking, dirt under the nails, and thought, 45%. He didn't know where that number came from. He'd been thinking it for weeks, the way you sometimes think words in someone else's voice without knowing whose. 45% of something. Almost half. His magic stirred under his skin like something stretching after a long sleep. The wisteria on the garden fence bloomed abruptly, all at once, entirely out of season. Harry looked at it for a moment, then looked at the house, then looked back at his hands. Right, he said quietly, to no one. Or perhaps to himself. Or perhaps to whatever ancient, patient, slowly waking thing was living in his blood and had been waiting for exactly this moment of recognition. Right, then. He stood up, brushed the dirt from his knees, picked up the garden trowel, and went back to weeding. But something had changed. Something that had been pointed inward, enduring, surviving, keeping itself small and contained, had reoriented. Turned outward. Started watching. Harry Potter had been a great many things in his 10 years, unwanted, unrecognized, underestimated, used. He had been, for all that time, a question that no one had given him the tools to answer. He was about to go somewhere that might have the answers. He was going to ask every question he had. And he was not, he had decided in that garden on that warm Saturday afternoon with the wisteria blooming impossibly behind him, going to stop asking until he had them all. The next Hogwarts letter arrived 3 days later. And the one after that the day after. And then 4 more. And then 11. The Dursleys' increasing panic at the volume of mail was, Harry observed, almost entirely missing the point, but he kept that observation to himself and focused on the thing he'd noticed about each letter, every single one carried, in its parchment and in the green ink of the address, which was written in a hand he didn't recognize and included the detail the cupboard under the stairs with a specificity that said someone knew a great deal about how he lived, the same faint pulling resonance as the house wards. The same magical signature. The same maker. He accepted this information calmly, filed it next to the thing he'd traced in the foundations, and went on eating his breakfast while Vernon talked about going somewhere for the weekend to get away from the letters, and Harry thought about what it meant that the school he was being invited to attend had been built, at least in part, by someone who was already stealing from him. He wasn't afraid of it. He was, if anything, interested. Whoever had set this up was sophisticated and patient and thought several moves ahead. So could he. He'd had his whole life to practice patience. He'd had his whole life to practice watching and waiting and understanding systems from the inside before deciding what to do about them. 11 was as good an age as any to start doing something. Hagrid came for him on a storm-dark night at a hut on a rock, which was the sort of unnecessarily dramatic entrance that Harry would come to associate, in retrospect, with most of the significant arrivals of his life. Hagrid was enormous and warm and immediately overwhelming, and Harry liked him instinctively, felt the man's emotional landscape like standing near a fireplace, uncomplicated heat and genuine affection with no cold places in it. That instinct, that reading of emotional truth, was already as natural to Harry as breathing. He'd stopped questioning it years ago. "You're a wizard, Harry," Hagrid told him, and Harry said, "I know," and Hagrid looked momentarily thrown. "How'd ya? Did someone tell ya?" "Not exactly," Harry said. "I worked it out." He paused. "There's a lot of things I've worked out that I'd like some answers about." "Oh, sure, Hagrid said, looking slightly uncertain in the way of someone who had been briefed to deliver specific information and was encountering questions he hadn't been prepped for. "We can, yeah. I'll help where I can." Harry looked at him steadily. The thing he felt from Hagrid was genuine, the man truly wanted to help, truly cared, and was genuinely operating with limited information. There were things Hagrid didn't know, and the things he didn't know were not things he was hiding, they were things he had simply never been told. Okay, Harry said. Let's start with Gringotts. I want to see if I have a vault. Hagrid blinked. Well, there's your mum and Dad's vault, my vault, Harry said. One in my name. I have a feeling there's one in my name. There was a pause. How would you know that? Hagrid asked slowly. Harry considered how to answer this. The truth was that he'd had a sense of it for months, the same way he had a sense of the pulling in the house wards, the same way he had a sense of the emotional weather in any room. There was something at Gringotts that resonated on the same frequency as whatever lived in his blood. Something that had been waiting for him for a long time, sealed against everything except him. I have good instincts, Harry said. Hagrid looked at him for a moment with an expression that was trying to decide what to do with a 10-year-old who spoke with the patient certainty of a much older person. Then he shook his head slightly and accepted it the way people with large, uncomplicated hearts tend to accept things that don't quite fit their understanding. He just made his understanding bigger. Right then, he said. Gringotts first. Outside, the storm was still going, rain hitting the rocks and the windows with indiscriminate enthusiasm. Dudley was asleep in the corner with a pig's tail, which Harry felt slightly bad about but not very. Vernon was doing something in the bedroom that involved a lot of heavy breathing and sounded like trying to blockade the door. Harry packed the 4 things he owned that mattered: his mother's photograph, which the Dursleys had not managed to take from him because he'd hidden it behind a loose brick in the garden wall, a notebook in which he'd written down every observation he'd made over the past 2 years about the pulling sensation and the house wards and the letters and the various magical incidents he'd catalogued, a marble he'd had since he was 6 that gave off, on close examination, a faint silver-green light. If you held it in a dark room, and the letter, the first one, which he'd retrieved from the bin after Vernon threw it away by performing the most deliberately non-suspicious retrieval operation of his life. He put them in the inside pocket of the jacket Hagrid had brought him. He looked around the hut, the peeling wallpaper, the salt smell, the rain noise. He looked at Dudley, who was going to wake up very confused. He felt no particular sorrow about leaving. He felt the door of something opening. Ready? Hagrid said. Yes, Harry said. He was. He stepped out into the storm without looking back. Chapter 2, The train knows the leaky cauldron smelled like wood smoke and old beer and something underneath both of those things that Harry couldn't name but felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just letting it wash over him, the noise of it, the warmth, the sheer density of magical signatures all layered on top of each other like a chord played by people who didn't know they were in the same song. He could feel all of them. Not precisely, not with detail, but in the broad impressionistic way he felt most emotional landscapes. This one was complex and warm and threaded through with the particular contentment of people who had found their correct environment. Wizards being among wizards. The comfort of belonging somewhere. Harry had never belonged anywhere. He catalogued the feeling of this room and thought, I want this. This specifically. Then Tom the barman spotted Hagrid and called out, and within 30 seconds the entire pub had spotted Harry, and the belonging feeling was replaced by something considerably more uncomfortable, a sudden sharp attention from every direction, the weight of people recognizing him, the specific emotional flavor of awe mixed with relief mixed with something almost proprietary. Our savior. Our symbol. Ours. Harry stood very still under all of it and smiled politely and shook the hands that were extended and said the appropriate things, and all the while he was running the other sense quietly underneath, reading the room, feeling for anything that wasn't genuine. Most of it was genuine. The awe was real. The relief was real. There was one man in the back corner whose attention had a sharp, assessing quality that felt different from the rest, but by the time Harry looked for him he was gone. He filed it away. Diagon Alley was extraordinary and Harry gave himself permission to simply experience it for the first few minutes, the color, the noise, the owls, the smells, a cauldron shop with cauldrons stacked in wobbling towers, a broomstick in a window that pulled at something in his chest the way certain music does. He asked Hagrid questions and Hagrid answered them with the particular enthusiasm of someone who loves the world they're describing, and it was good, and Harry let it be good. Then they reached Gringotts and Harry walked up those white stone steps and felt it. Not the pulling sensation from the house wards, something different, something going the other direction. Not a taking but an offering. Recognition. The marble in his jacket pocket, which had been inert since he packed it, glowed warm against his chest through the fabric. The goblin at the main desk looked up as Harry approached and his expression did something subtle that Harry caught because he was watching for exactly that kind of thing, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a fractional pause, or reassessment. Goblins were legendary for their emotional opacity and their near impossible to read faces, and this one's face had nonetheless done something when Harry came through the door. "Harry Potter," Harry said. "I'd like to access my vault. My personal vault. Not my parents' vault, mine." Hagrid made a sound beside him. Harry didn't look at him. The goblin, his nameplate said Griphook, held Harry's gaze for a moment that stretched slightly longer than professional courtesy required. Then he said, "Key." "I don't have a key," Harry said. "The vault is sealed with blood lock. My blood, specifically." He paused. I believe I was told, that it would recognize me." He hadn't been told this. He had inferred it from everything Ailindra had done and everything his parents had been careful enough to do in the 12 months between the rite and their deaths, and from the resonance he'd been feeling since he walked through the door. But inference felt too thin to put in words right now, so he went with the cleaner version. Griphook looked at him for another long moment. "Follow me," he said. Hagrid followed them both, bewildered and increasingly wide-eyed, through the marble halls and down through the tunnels in the cart that made Hagrid go pale and made Harry's stomach drop pleasantly, past vault after vault, and the deeper they went the more clearly Harry felt the thing he was moving toward, the resonance getting stronger and more specific, until they stopped in front of a vault door that was different from the others. The others had keyholes or combination locks or both. This one had a single shallow depression in the center of the door, roughly the size and shape of a palm. The metal around it was worked in a pattern that wasn't quite Celtic knotwork and wasn't quite anything else, a flowing design that moved in the corner of the eye and held still when you looked directly at it. "Place your palm," Griphook said. Harry placed his palm. The vault opened immediately, with a sound like a chord being struck, multiple resonating tones, not a mechanical click. The door swung in. And the light from inside was that silver green, unmistakable now, the same color as the right circle's glow that had been done in the Potter kitchen 9 years ago, though Harry of course had no memory of that. The color of his own magic when it moved without restriction. The color of something that was his in a way that went past ownership. "Blimey," Hagrid breathed. The vault was not large. It wasn't full of gold. It contained a wooden box, a sealed letter with Harry's name on it in his mother's handwriting, and a slim book bound in something that wasn't quite leather, a silver-gray material that had the quality of birch bark and the smoothness of old silk. Harry took all three. He looked at his mother's handwriting on the envelope for a moment, then put it inside his jacket with the marble. The book he opened just far enough to see it was written in 2 hands, one he recognized from the envelope as his mother's, one he didn't know and suspected was his father's. The wooden box, when he opened it, contained a ring, plain white metal, set with a stone the color of a cloudy sky, and a folded note in a third hand he'd never seen, in an alphabet he couldn't read but that his blood responded to with a warmth that was distinct from anything he'd felt before. He put the ring on. It fit perfectly. The stone briefly blazed silver green and then went quiet. Griphook was watching all of this with an expression that had moved past professional neutrality into something Harry could only read as intense interest. When Harry turned to leave the vault, the goblin said, very quietly, "The protections on this vault were exceptional workmanship. The one who designed the blood lock had considerable knowledge of old magics." "My mother," Harry said. "Yes," Griphook said. "And she had help, I think. From someone older." A pause. "The vault has been queried. Twice. In the years since it was sealed. By someone who could not open it." Harry looked at him. "Recently?" "The second query was 3 months ago." Harry thought about the pulling sensation in the Privet Drive wards. About the 11 letters. About the deliberate address, the cupboard under the stairs, that said someone had been watching. "Thank you," he said. "That's useful." Griphook inclined his head in a way that was not quite a bow and was not quite not one. In the cart on the way back up, Hagrid said carefully, "Harry, I didn't know about that vault." "I know," Harry said. "Who told ya about it?" "No one," Harry said. "I felt it." He looked at Hagrid, who was looking back at him with that expression of trying to expand his understanding. "Hagrid. What do you know about Fey bloodlines in wizarding families?" A long pause. The cart rattled and climbed. "Not much," Hagrid said honestly. "Old history. Rare." "Why?" Harry looked at the ring on his finger. The stone had gone still and grey, but it was warm against his skin, present the way living things are present. "Just something I'm reading about," he said. He read his mother's letter that night, alone in room 11 of the Leaky Cauldron with the door locked, and Hedwig, he'd named her on the spot, something from a book in the Hogwarts school list, a name that felt right the way some names do, sitting on the headboard watching him with golden, serious eyes. Lily Potter's letter was 9 pages long. It was dated October 28, 1981, 3 days before her death. She had written it knowing she might not make it. Written it calmly, in the clear precise sentences of someone who had decided to be useful rather than afraid. She told him about Ailindra. She told him about the right, the circle, the number, 45%, Harry, which your father and I were told was extraordinary and which I believe, watching you, because you have been extraordinary since the first morning of your life. She told him about the Fey gifts he might expect, the emotional attunement, the instinctive truth sense, the way his magic would respond to intention rather than technique, faster and more directly than standard wizarding magic. She told him to trust his own perception. Then she told him about Dumbledore. She was careful, in that section, in the way of someone who is aware that they might be wrong and wants to leave room for being wrong. She wrote, "I want to be clear that I have no proof of intent. What I have is Ailindra's account of his research, which is second-hand, and my own observations of certain things that have felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. I am telling you this not to make you afraid of him or hostile to him, but because you deserve to know what the possibilities are and to judge them yourself." She wrote, "You have always been able to feel the truth of things. I noticed it before you could walk. When James told you something that wasn't quite true, only ever small things, white lies, nothing unkind, you would look at him with such a specific expression, like you were identifying a smudge on something that should have been clean. Trust that. Trust it, especially when everyone around you is telling you the same story, because a chorus of agreement is not the same as truth." She wrote, "I love you. I am so proud of you. I am proud of you right now, writing this, knowing who you're going to be, which I know the way I know my own heartbeat. You are going to be magnificent, and you are going to do it on your own terms, and I am so sorry that I am not going to be there to see it." Harry sat with the letter for a long time after he finished reading it. Hedwig made a soft sound and flew down from the headboard to his shoulder, and he let her sit there, her talons careful against his shoulder, her warmth immediate and real. He was not going to cry. He had constructed, over 10 years, very efficient architecture around grief, the kind that lets you feel it without drowning in it. He felt it now, clean and sharp, and then absorbed, taken in, added to everything else his mother had given him that he was only now understanding the size of. He read the book next. It was, as he'd suspected, written jointly by Lily and James in the year between the right and their deaths. Half of it was practical, observations of his early magical manifestations, notes on Fey bloodline theory that Lily had clearly researched intensively, a glossary of terms in Old Fey with translations that James had written with bracketed commentary like, "Lily says this word means, recognition, but I think it also means, reckoning, and she says those are the same thing and I think she might be right." The other half of the book was something different. It was a record of everything they'd noticed about Dumbledore in the year after Ailindra's visit. Pattern of contact. Things he'd said that had the feeling of being said for effect. Instances where his advice, followed, had resulted in a narrowing of their options rather than an expansion. His persistent efforts to be the one managing Harry's protective arrangements. His resistance when James had suggested other options. His parents, Harry understood, had been building a case. A careful, evidenced, deliberately unemotional case, the kind that a court of law could examine. They hadn't had time to finish it. He was going to finish it. September 1st was grey and pleasantly cool, the kind of morning that felt like a held breath. Harry moved through King's Cross with his trolley and his owl and the knowledge that the barrier to platform 9 3/4 was somewhere between pillars 9 and 10, which he deduced from his parents' book and confirmed from overheard conversation on the street outside the station. He didn't need the confirmation. He could feel the platform. He walked through the barrier without hesitation, without closing his eyes, because he already knew it was there the way he knew when a room had people in it before he opened the door. The Hogwarts Express waited on the other side in a cloud of white steam, impossibly red, impossibly real, and the sight of it did something uncomplicated and good to something in Harry's chest. He stood for a moment just breathing the cold and steam air. Then the resonance hit him like a wave. It was coming from the train itself, not from any person on it but from the train, from the thing that the train represented, which was Hogwarts. The school's foundational magic was woven through the Hogwarts Express the way a person's character is in their handwriting, specific and unmistakable. And what Harry felt from it was Fey work. Old Fey work, centuries old, woven into the school's magical foundations at the building stage. The school had been built with Fey involvement. The school's core protective magic was partly Fey in origin. And it recognized him, the same way the Gringotts Vault had recognized him, recognition going in both directions, his blood resonating back with the school's foundation like two tuning forks set vibrating. He stood on platform 9 3/4 for 10 full seconds, absolutely still, feeling that. Feeling the warmth of being recognized by something that old. Something that had been waiting, in its patient non-conscious way, for the right frequency to come along. "Are you all right?" The voice was female, precise, with an underlying current of impatience kept firmly in check by good manners. Harry turned. The girl was his age, possibly slightly older seeming, with a great deal of bushy brown hair and an expression that was simultaneously asking if he needed help and assessing whether he actually did or was simply standing there for unclear reasons. She had a cat carrier at her feet with a very flat-faced, judgmental-looking cat inside, and a book tucked under her arm with a finger marking her page, which said a great deal about her priorities. "Fine," Harry said. "I was just feeling something." "Feeling something," she repeated. "The train. Or, what the train is connected to. The school's magic." He looked at her. "Can't you feel it?" She looked at him with an expression that had moved from assessing to genuinely curious, which Harry registered as a good sign. She didn't dismiss it. She thought about it. I haven't noticed anything specific," she said carefully. "Though I'm Muggle-born, which may mean I have less frame of reference for what I'm supposed to be noticing." A pause. "Hermione Granger," she added, because apparently she'd decided that if they were going to have a conversation, introductions were efficient. "Harry Potter," he said. Her eyes went to his forehead and then back to his face in a movement so quick it was almost professional. "I know who you are," she said. "I've read about you." "What did it say?" "That you defeated you-know-who as a baby during a magical backlash, which most scholars agree is probably not the complete explanation, and that you were subsequently placed with your Muggle relatives under protective enchantments arranged by Albus Dumbledore." She delivered this the way she probably delivered most information, fluently, with no apparent judgment about whether delivering it was appropriate, simply offering it as content. Then she paused. "You have a very strange expression." "Do I? Like I said something interesting without knowing I'd said something interesting." Harry looked at her for a moment. She was watching him with those precise, intelligent eyes, her book still held at her side, and the emotional signal she was putting out was entirely genuine, no performance in it, no social calculation, just sheer unorchestrated curiosity about the world and the things in it, of which he had apparently become one. He made a decision. "Want to find a compartment," he said. "I have some things I want to think out loud about and I suspect you'd be useful." She blinked. Then she smiled, quickly, like a reaction she hadn't planned. "Yes," she said. "All right." They found a compartment at the far end of the train, which was quieter and further from the main foot traffic. "Hermione's cat, Crookshanks," she said, and the cat gave Harry a look of deeply personal approval that he found gratifying, settled on the seat beside her and went to sleep with the authority of someone who has claimed territory. Hedwig was in her cage in the luggage rack above, watching proceedings with interest. "Tell me," Hermione said, opening her notebook. She had produced a notebook from her bag with the inevitability of someone who produces notebooks from bags as a biological function, "what you meant on the platform." "About feeling the magic." So Harry told her. Not everything, not all at once, he wasn't reckless, and trust was something he measured carefully. But enough. He told her about the pulling sensation in the Privet Drive house wards. About the Gringotts vault and its resonance, the blood lock, the book his parents had left him. About the way the train had felt on the platform. He didn't tell her the number yet, or about Dumbledore specifically, because those were the load-bearing pieces and he needed to know she could handle the smaller pieces first. Hermione listened without interrupting except twice, both times to ask questions that were so precisely targeted to the gaps in his account that he noted them specifically. She took notes. She occasionally frowned at her own notes, which suggested she was finding connections between things that concerned her. When he finished she sat for a moment in silence, her pen tapping against the notebook. "The blood lock," she said. "That's not standard wizarding magic." "No. And your instinct about what was in the vault, you said you felt it through the bank itself. Before you got to the vault." She was working through it, visibly, building the picture. "And the pulling sensation in the house has been consistent for at least 2 years, which means it's a maintained working, not a passive residual. Someone is actively sustaining it." "Yes," Harry said. "Someone with ongoing access, or a working sophisticated enough to maintain itself with periodic refreshing." He paused. The vault record said someone had queried it twice. The most recent query was 3 months ago. Hermione looked at him. "Who has access to the house's protective enchantments?" "I think," Harry said, "that's the right question." A pause. Outside the train window the London suburbs were thinning into countryside, green and fast. The train was picking up speed, the rhythm of the rails becoming steady underneath them, and Harry felt the school's foundational magic getting stronger as they moved toward it, that silver-green resonance thickening like a song heard from further and further away becoming audible. "What are you going to do?" Hermione asked. "I'm going to find out everything," Harry said simply. "About my blood, about what was built into the house wards, about who built it and why. And then I'm going to decide what to do about it based on actual information rather than on the account of events that someone else has managed." He looked at her. "Your notes are very good." She looked briefly startled, as if she wasn't used to having that acknowledged. "I like evidence," she said. "I like building cases. I find it satisfying when things fit together logically." "Good," Harry said. "Because I have a case to build and I'd rather have company." A knock at the compartment door, and it slid open to reveal a round-faced boy with a toad clutched to his chest and an expression of general mild catastrophe. "Sorry," he said, looking at them. "You haven't seen a toad? Mine got loose. His name's Trevor, he looked at the toad in his own hands. Oh. There he is. Sorry." He started to close the door. "You can sit with us," Harry said. "If you want." The boy looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has not been invited to sit with people very often and is therefore mildly suspicious of invitations. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "Yes. I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom." He paused. Are you sure it's all right? Neville, Hermione said briskly, get in and close the door, you're letting the draft in. Neville got in and closed the door. He settled Trevor the Toad into his lap and looked at Harry with the somewhat overwhelmed expression of someone sitting in a compartment with a great deal of concentrated unusualness and trying to adjust. Then he seemed to look more carefully, and his expression shifted, something in it going from social anxiety to a different kind of attention altogether. There's something, he started, then stopped. What? Harry said. There's something different about you, Neville said, with the tone of someone reporting an observation rather than offering an opinion. I don't know what it is. I'm not very good at magic yet. But my gran has these books. He stopped again, as if he'd said more than he meant to. What kind of books? Hermione asked. Neville looked at his toad. Old ones. About, a pause, during which he seemed to make a decision. About old bloodlines. Fey history in wizarding families. My gran's family has he paused, a history with it. Distantly. She keeps the books mostly as curiosities, she says, but she reads them. He looked up at Harry. There's a thing in one of them about Fey blood concentration. About what it looks like in someone who's actually carrying it in significant amounts. And you, he gestured vaguely at Harry. You have that. Whatever that thing is. The compartment was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother has those books with her? Harry asked. At home. But I've read most of them. Neville looked slightly embarrassed. I read a lot of things when I'm nervous, and I'm nervous most of the time, so I've read quite a lot. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione was already writing in her notebook. Neville, Harry said, I think you might be very useful. Neville looked uncertain about this in the specific way of someone who has been told they're useful before and found the experience complicated. Possibly, he said. I don't know. I'm not very good at. I didn't ask if you were good at anything, Harry said. I asked if you'd been reading the right books. Those are different questions. Neville thought about this. Then, very slowly, he smiled, a real one, not the apologetic near smile he'd been offering since he walked in. Yeah, he said. I think maybe I have been. Ron Weasley found them an hour later, led by what appeared to be a survey of every compartment looking for someone to share his food with, which was fine. Harry liked him immediately. He was funny and genuine and had a lateral way of thinking about things that Harry appreciated. He was also, Harry noticed, carrying some assumptions about Harry that had been given to him rather than formed, which was interesting in its own right. Not harmful assumptions, just, shaped. Ron had a story about who Harry Potter was and what Harry Potter was like, and it had the quality of a story that had been told to him rather than one he'd built himself. Harry filed that too. The food trolley came and went. The afternoon settled. At some point a red-headed girl Harry thought might be one of Ron's sisters knocked to say something to Ron, and Hermione and Neville got into an argument about transfiguration theory that was apparently already covering material they hadn't been taught yet, and Harry watched all of it with the quiet pleasure of someone observing a system becoming a thing and knowing they're watching its beginning. Then the train began to slow, and the light outside went golden and then dark, and Hermione produced robes from her bag with the preparedness of someone who had read the school list 3 times, and Harry felt the resonance of the school's magic getting strong enough that it was almost audible. Almost a sound rather than a sense. By the time they disembarked at Hogsmeade Station and piled into the boats on the Black Lake and the castle rose ahead of them in the dark, it was not almost a sound. It was a sound. Harry heard it clearly, a low chord at the edge of hearing, silver green and deep, old beyond old, the working of Fey hands laid down in stone and wood and ward 4 centuries ago, and it was talking to his blood, very clearly, in a language his blood already knew. Recognized, it said. Named. Welcome. He kept his face composed. He kept it still. Beside him in the boat, Neville looked at him sideways. You can hear it, Neville said very quietly, not quite a question. Yes, Harry said. My Grand's books say that when a Fey-blood person of significant concentration enters a Fey-warded place for the first time, the wards respond. She said it hadn't happened in living memory. A pause. She also said the last person it happened to was someone the wards nearly dismantled all the other magical protections for. To make room. Harry looked at the castle. The castle looked back, the way very old things look at you, not with eyes but with attention, with the accumulated regard of centuries pointing at something that has finally arrived. Good, he said. The sorting hat was the part Harry had been thinking about most. Not strategically, exactly, just aware of it, circling it. The hat was old, far older than any other artifact in the school, and it was the school's primary sentient magical object. If anything in Hogwarts had absorbed the foundational Fey magic deeply enough to retain awareness of it, it was the hat. He stood in the line of first years filing through the great hall and let the magnificent, ridiculous, genuinely breathtaking space wash over him, the floating candles, the 4 tables, the staff table at the front, the night sky above and the enchanted ceiling. He felt the emotional landscape of the room, 400-odd students generating awe and nerves and excitement and boredom in a warm overlapping cloud, and above all of it, at the staff table, individual signatures that he noted without yet cataloguing fully. He looked at Dumbledore. The headmaster sat in the center of the staff table, watching the first years file in with an expression of warm, paternal benevolence. He was exactly what he looked like, ancient, white-bearded, spectacled, exuding a grandfatherly warmth that was entirely genuine and entirely constructed, both things simultaneously, in the way of people who have built their public self so carefully that they genuinely inhabit it. Harry felt the magical signature from across the room and recognized it immediately, in his blood and in his bones. It was the same as the house wards. The same maker. Dumbledore's eyes found Harry in the line and his smile, warm and welcoming, did not change. Harry held his gaze for 2 seconds, giving nothing, and then looked away. Potter, Harry. He sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall dropped the hat over his head. The inside of the hat was dark and warm and there was a long pause. Well, said a voice that wasn't quite sound, coming from everywhere inside the darkness at once. I have been waiting 11 years to do this. Harry didn't say anything. You know what you are. Or you're beginning to. The vault helped. Your mother's letter helped. And you are not a boy who needs things spelled out for him, which is refreshing, I will tell you, after several centuries of spelling things out for boys. What can you tell me? Harry thought. More than most. Less than you'll need. A pause. The school knows you. I expect you felt that on the lake. The Fey work in the foundations, it was done by a master craftsman whose name the histories have lost, which was the way the Fey preferred it. They built deep. What they built has been waiting for something of sufficient resonance to activate fully. Another pause. It has activated. As of approximately 14 minutes ago when you walked through the main doors. What does that mean? It means the school will cooperate with you in ways it cooperates with no one else. Not the headmaster, not the staff, with you. The warding, the library locks, the restricted archive seals. The Fey work treats you as something between a student and a custodian. It will not allow harm to come to you through its own systems. The hat's voice shifted slightly. It also means that anyone whose magical access to you has been running through the school's systems will find that access disrupted. Harry felt something, right then, like a thread pulled free of a needle. Something releasing. Something that had been present so long he'd stopped registering it as a thing that could be absent. The pulling sensation. Gone. Not reduced. Not muffled. Gone. The sudden absence of it was so complete and so immediate that it felt like surfacing from underwater you hadn't known you'd been breathing. He sat on the stool in the great hall and felt himself, for the first time in his memory, entirely intact. Yes, the hat said. That. Tell me about the ward he's building, Harry thought. I know of it. The ward of absolute peace. It's theoretical, it has been theoretical for a very long time, and most serious scholars consider it non-viable. The blood requirements alone are met, Harry thought. By me. A long pause from the hat. Longer than before. Then it's no longer theoretical. The hat's voice was quieter. He has been harvesting for 9 years. He has approximately a third of what the ritual requires. To complete it, he would need direct access to your blood with your cooperation, or without it. If he could arrange circumstances where he could take it directly. There are scenarios, the hat said, where that could be arranged. A medical situation, perhaps. An injury. A moment of unconsciousness. He is a patient man. I know, Harry said. What house? That's what I'm supposed to be deciding. The hat sounded almost amused. You would succeed in any of them. Ravenclaw would value you. Slytherin would challenge you. Hufflepuff would center you. A pause. Gryffindor needs you. And more relevantly, you need what Gryffindor can offer you right now, the relationships, the access, the proximity to certain other people who are going to matter. One of whom is already wearing these robes. Harry thought of Hermione. Of Neville. Of the case he was building and the people he was going to need to build it with. Gryffindor, he thought. Not as a question. Gryffindor. The hat bellowed, and the table at the far right of the hall erupted, and Harry lifted the hat from his head and handed it back to Professor McGonagall and walked to the table and sat down, and across the room he felt Dumbledore's attention, warm, watchful, entirely certain that everything was proceeding as intended. Harry helped himself to a bread roll and thought, let him think that. Later, when the feast was done and the first years were being herded upstairs by a prefect named Percy who had the energy of someone who had never met a rule he didn't want to enforce, Harry managed a moment beside Neville in the corridor. The hat said something to you, Neville said quietly. Not a question. Yes. Did it say anything about the school? About the Fey work in the foundations? Harry said, just as quietly. Yes. Neville looked at him. My Gran's books have a name for what you are. Not just Fey blood, specifically what you are, with the school, with the old magic recognizing you. He paused. They call it Arundel. It's old Fey. It means, the one the stones remember, Harry said. Neville stared at him. How did you know that? Harry thought about it. He hadn't known it, not consciously. The word had arrived fully formed, translated, the moment Neville started saying it, like something surfacing from deep water. Like a word in a language he hadn't known he spoke. I don't know, he said honestly. I just did. A pause. Neville. Can your grandmother send you those books? I can write to her tonight, Neville said. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was not quite awe and not quite fear, something more like the expression of someone who has been reading about a thing for years and has just encountered the actual thing. She'll want to know you're here, he said. She'll want to know, the school responded. She told me once that her grandmother's grandmother used to say that there would come a time when the old blood returned to the old places and the old magic would wake up. He paused. She thought it was a story. Lots of true things get called stories, Harry said. Percy bellowed for first years to keep moving. They kept moving. Harry went to sleep that night in his four-poster in Gryffindor Tower and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific physical sensation of something taking root, not the pulling of something being taken out but the opposite, the deep establishing pressure of something pushing in, something that was his own and was finally in the right soil. He read 3 more pages of his parents' book before the candle guttered and went out. He was already planning tomorrow. Chapter 3, What the records show. The Hogwarts library opened at 7 in the morning and Harry was there at 5 past, which meant he was first and Hermione arrived 4 minutes later looking only slightly surprised to find him already seated with a stack of books. How long have you been awake? She said, dropping her bag in the chair across from him. Since 4, Harry said. The castle is loud when it's quiet. She looked at him. I mean, the foundational magic. It's more audible at night. When there's less noise to compete with. He paused. I've been listening to it. Hermione sat down slowly, like someone who has decided to accept a set of premises she hasn't fully verified yet because the alternative is to stop having an interesting morning. What does it sound like? Like the lowest string on a very old instrument, Harry said. One note, held. Sometimes two. He pushed one of the books toward her. This is the most comprehensive history of Hogwarts construction I could find in the main collection. I need to find the records of what magical workings were laid during the founding period. Specifically anything done by non-wizard craftsmen. Non-wizard meaning Fae, Hermione said. The hat confirmed it. The Fae work is in the foundations. It's been there since the school was built. He looked at her. Someone built this school with Fae involvement and then that involvement was, he considered his word, edited out of the historical record. Hermione's expression did the thing where her eyes went slightly sharper, which Harry had already identified as her tell for genuine intellectual engagement. Edited meaning accidentally lost or deliberately removed. That's one of the things I want to find out. He opened his own book. Start from the founding period. Flag anything that mentions the physical construction, the original warding, any non-human magical contributors. I'm going to cross-reference with the school charter records. Where are the school charter records? Restricted section. We can't, I think I can, Harry said, not looking up from his page. The hat said the school would cooperate with me. I want to test the specific boundaries of what that means. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her book. They worked in comfortable silence for an hour. The library filled slowly around them, a few studious older students, a pair of Ravenclaws doing what looked like homework due today, a fourth-year Hufflepuff sleeping in the corner with a book open on his face. Madame Pants moved between the stacks with the specific authority of someone who regards every book as a personal responsibility and every reader as a potential threat. At 8:30 Neville arrived slightly out of breath, carrying a sealed package with an owl feather still stuck to the twine. He sat down and said, Gran responded, in a slightly amazed voice, which suggested he'd been expecting at least a day's delay. She sent 4 books. He looked at the package with a complicated expression. She also sent a letter. What did it say? Harry asked. Neville pulled the letter out of his pocket. He'd already read it, clearly, but he unfolded it with the deliberateness of someone handling something significant. She says, he scanned it, that she's been waiting for something like this since before I was born. That her grandmother kept these books and told her they would be relevant someday and she thought it was the wishful thinking of an old woman. He paused. She says to tell you specifically, that the name in the right records is Alyndra, if that means anything to you. Harry looked up. It does, he said quietly. Neville folded the letter. She also says she wants to meet you. At Christmas, if you'd like to come. He seemed slightly uncertain about delivering this invitation, as if not sure how a person who had just met his grandmother by reputation would receive being invited to her house. Tell her yes, Harry said. Absolutely yes. Neville looked quietly pleased in the way people look when something they hoped would happen has happened. They opened the books. Augusta Longbottom's collection was old, not antique old in the decorative sense but old in the way of things that had been handled and read regularly, the spines worn soft, the margins annotated in at least 3 different hands across what looked like multiple generations. The language in parts of it was archaic enough that reading it felt like wading upstream. Here, Hermione said, 40 minutes later, with the particular tone of a person who has found something and is trying to gauge its significance before announcing it. She turned her book so Harry and Neville could see. It was the Hogwarts history she'd been assigned, open to a section on the construction of the school's foundational wards. The text itself was brief and fairly dry. But in the margin, in old ink, in a hand that was not the book's original author, someone had written, See Restricted Charter Volume 3. The true account. The builders' names were removed at Salazar's insistence in 983, he did not want it known that non-human craftsmen had laid the deepest work. The magic disagreed with his erasure. It always has. The three of them looked at this for a moment. 983, Neville said. That's during the founding period. Salazar Slytherin didn't want the Fae involvement recorded, Hermione said. She had her thinking expression. But whoever wrote this margin note clearly knew it was there and knew it had been deliberately suppressed. She looked at Harry. That's at least 900 years of people knowing this and choosing not to make it common knowledge. Or being prevented from making it common knowledge, Harry said. He stood up. I'm going to get the charter. Harry, Hermione said. Madam Pants will, let's see, Harry said. He walked to the restricted section gate. It was locked with a standard ward that any teacher with reasonable authority could open, and also, he could feel it, with 3 layers of something older and more specific underneath that. Access charms. Recognition protocols. He put his hand on the gate latch and felt the Feywork in the school's foundations respond immediately, the way a door responds to the right key, a smooth, unhesitating release. 3 layers of additional wards dissolved in sequence, each one going out like a candle. The gate opened. Madam Pants appeared from between 2 shelves like a conjuration. She looked at Harry, then at the open gate, then back at Harry. Harry looked back at her pleasantly. The librarian's expression did something very complicated. She was a sharp woman, perceptive in the way of people who have spent their lives around books that contain secrets, and she was clearly reading the situation and arriving at conclusions that surprised her. She said, with careful precision, students require a teacher's note for restricted access. I understand that's the normal policy, Harry said. But the gate opened for me without one, which I think means the school has a different policy for me specifically. He paused. I'll return everything I take in perfect condition. I have no interest in damage or removal. Another long pause. Madam Pants looked at the gate, which was quite definitively open, and appeared to be weighing rule enforcement against the reality that the rule had already been superseded by an older authority. Charter records are in the 3rd alcove on the left, she said at last, in the tone of someone making a decision she's going to think about later. They are not to be removed from the section. Thank you, Harry said. He went in and found the charter volumes in the 3rd alcove on the left. Volume 3 was not, at first glance, on the shelf. There was a gap between volumes 2 and 4 that had the look of a deliberate absence. But when Harry put his hand in the gap and felt with his other sense, there was something there, occupying the space of the missing volume without being visible. He closed his fingers around it and it became real under his touch, the school's magic peeling back the concealment charm with the same untroubled cooperativeness it had shown at the gate. He sat down in the restricted section with the charter volume. It was dense and difficult and enormously interesting. By the end of the first week Harry had 4 notebooks full of his own notes and Hermione had 2 and Neville had contributed 4 passages from Augusta's collection that cross-referenced with the charter records in ways that tightened the picture considerably. They had established the following, which Harry wrote on a single sheet of parchment and pinned inside the cover of his primary notebook. The Hogwarts foundational wards were laid by a Fey master craftsman named Salander in 992 CE, working in partnership with the 4 founders. The work was primarily Fey in design and execution, the founders contributed magical power but the architecture was Salander's. Salazar Slytherin subsequently had the name and nature of this contribution removed from all official records. The magic itself resisted this removal and remains functionally intact. The wards are designed to recognize Fey bloodlines of significant concentration and extend to those individuals an access level equivalent to a school custodian, warden, status in Old Fey theory. This has not been triggered in recorded Hogwarts history. The Ward of Absolute Peace, Old Fey, Surrendal Pax, is documented in Salander's theoretical appendices, included in the restricted charter materials. It requires a stable Fey blood source of no less than 40% concentration, sufficient harvested blood, approximately 12 years of monthly collection, and a ritual locus of sufficient Feywork density to act as the amplification point. The locus would need to be Hogwarts itself, or somewhere of equivalent Fey construction. There is nowhere of equivalent Fey construction in Britain. Dumbledore began researching the Sorrendal Pacts in 1961. He has had access to these charter records through legitimate headmaster permissions since 1967. He has known the requirements for 30 years. Harry Potter's birth in 1980 with a 45% Fey blood concentration was the first viable source identified in at least 2 centuries, possibly ever. Current estimate of harvested blood, approximately 30 to 35% of the required total, based on 9 years of monthly collection from the Privet Drive wards, cross-referenced with Salander's documented quantities. He looked at the sheet for a while after he finished writing it. Then he showed it to Hermione. She read it twice. Her face did several things. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with the specific brightness that he'd already learned meant she was both intellectually engaged and genuinely, quietly furious, the combination that made her most effective. He needs 4 more years, she said. At minimum. If he maintains the Privet Drive collection rate, Harry said. Which he can't, because those wards are no longer functioning. He watched her do the calculation. So he has to find another way to collect, she said. A faster way. More directly. Her jaw set. He'll try to create a situation where he has legitimate access to your blood. Medical situation, Harry said. Injury. Unconscious, or appearing unconscious. He paused. The hat mentioned scenarios. I've been thinking about what those scenarios look like. You can't just avoid being injured for the rest of your school career, Hermione said with the frustrated logic of someone who very much wished you could. No, Harry agreed. So I need to build the case fast enough that it becomes moot. If the right people know what he's doing and have documented proof, he loses the ability to act on it. He's too careful to keep doing this with a genuine legal risk over his head. The right people being, Gringotts, Harry said. They already know someone queried the vault. The goblins have their own legal interests in Fey blood theft, there's treaty law there that predates the Ministry by several centuries. And, he paused. Sirius Black. Hermione looked at him carefully. He's in Azkaban. He shouldn't be, Harry said. He was never tried. My parents' book has a section on it, my father wrote it, and he was furious. Sirius was their secret keeper, supposedly, and supposedly he betrayed them and killed those muggles. But my father had doubts. He wrote them down. Doubts how? Sirius Black was my father's closest friend. My father wrote that he would have trusted Sirius with anything. And then he wrote, Harry had the page memorized, that when he thought about it carefully, there was one other person who could have done it. Who had the knowledge and the motivation and who no one would have suspected because everyone liked him. Peter Pettigrew. He paused. Who died in the same street, leaving only a finger, and was awarded a posthumous Order of Merlin. Hermione's pen had stopped moving. She was looking at him very directly. My father thought Pettigrew was the traitor, Harry said. He never had time to prove it. And Sirius Black was put in Azkaban without a trial, that is not standard procedure. That is a significant legal anomaly for someone convicted of 12 murders. He looked at her. Who had the influence to suppress a trial? The silence stretched. We need the trial records, Hermione said. There aren't any, Harry said. I checked. There's a ministry record of his commitment to Azkaban but no trial documentation. Which is itself a legal violation of at least 3 statutes in the Wisengamot Charter. He paused. But the absence of trial records is itself evidence. The absence is the document. Hermione was writing again, fast. We need a lawyer, she said. A proper magical one with no connection to Dumbledore. Gringotts will know one. The goblins will have their own interests in pursuing this cleanly if it involves Feyblood treaty violations. He looked at her. "This is a lot to ask of you," he added. "You've been here a week. You signed up for a compartment conversation on a train, not," he gestured. "I signed up for building a case," Hermione said, not looking up from her notes. "This is a case. A very significant one." A pause. "Also, Dumbledore stole magic from a child for 9 years and arranged for that child to live in a cupboard under some stairs, so I am personally motivated." She said this with absolute flatness, not performing the anger, just stating it as fact, which Harry found more affecting than any amount of visible emotion would have been. "The cupboard thing is in my parents' records too," Harry said. "My mother wrote a section on what she wanted for me. What she specifically did not want." He paused. "She was very clear about the cupboard." Hermione looked up then, briefly, and the expression on her face lasted only a second before she put it away and went back to her notes. But he'd seen it. The first months of Hogwarts developed around all of this the way a river develops around a new channel, most of the flow continuing in its original direction while a secondary current pulled steady and purposeful alongside it. Harry attended classes. He was very good at most of them in the way his parents' book had predicted, magic that responded to will and intention rather than to precise mechanical execution, his workings carrying a clarity of effect that most first years were several years away from achieving. He was not the best student in his year, Hermione was the best student in her year and probably in several other years besides. But he was the most instinctive, and he was learning the difference between those two things and how they complemented each other. Charms was his strongest subject in the conventional sense. Flitwick gave him full marks on their first practical with an expression of professional delight. Transfiguration was interesting because it was the subject where will and intention alone were least sufficient. McGonagall's class was rigorous in the way of something built on precise theory rather than raw application, and Harry found himself genuinely working at it, which he appreciated. McGonagall herself he was watching carefully. He'd been watching all the teachers, the way he watched all rooms, the way he'd watched every environment in his life, reading the emotional landscape, mapping the characters. Most of them were clearly themselves, Flitwick enthusiastic and warm, Snape's hostility a cold and complex thing that Harry felt clearly but didn't fully understand yet, Quirrell carrying something underneath his stutter that felt wrong in a specific and interesting way. McGonagall was different. She was precise and demanding and fair in the particular way of a person who has decided that fairness is a practice rather than an instinct and works at it daily. And underneath all of that, woven through everything she was a deep and genuine affection for this school and the students in it that she expressed almost entirely through rigorous expectation rather than anything warmer. She cared about them by demanding the best from them. She was not warm. She was not distant. She was exacting. In the way of love that doesn't know how to be soft. Harry thought she didn't know about the harvesting, about any of it. He thought if she knew she would do something about it, and the fact that she hadn't done anything suggested she didn't know. He needed her to know eventually. He needed her to know at the right moment, with the right information in hand, because the moment he told Minerva McGonagall that Albus Dumbledore had been stealing from a student for 9 years, he needed the full case assembled. He was going to get one good hit of her outrage and he needed to aim it properly. He was patient. He was extraordinarily patient for an 11-year-old, which was, he had come to understand, part of what the Fey blood did for him, not slowness but the particular quality of stillness that came from feeling time differently. The old things felt time differently, and something old lived in him. Dumbledore was also watching. Harry felt his attention consistently, in the Great Hall at mealtimes, in corridors when their paths crossed, and most precisely in the weekly assemblies in the first month when Dumbledore would address the school and his gaze would find Harry with the reliable quality of a compass finding north. The attention was warm, always. It was the attention of a man who genuinely loved and was also managing, simultaneously, the two impulses not in conflict within him but braided together so thoroughly that Dumbledore himself probably couldn't tell them apart. Harry met his eyes every time. Politely. Without expression. He let nothing show. He thought, you have 30%. You need 40 more. You cannot take it without access. You are going to try to create access, and I am going to be ready for every scenario you try. He went back to his notes. The troll happened in October. Harry had not planned for the troll. In retrospect he should have. He could feel from his first week that something was wrong with Quirrell, something underneath the anxious exterior that was cold and purposeful and pointed. But the troll arrived during the Halloween feast as a consequence of Quirrell's deliberate actions, and Harry's attention was mostly elsewhere that particular afternoon because he was in the library working on the charter cross-references, which meant he was not in the feast when Quirrell's announcement emptied the Great Hall into panicked movement. He was already heading for the girls' bathroom on the second floor because Neville, who had been looking for him, found him instead and said in a rushed voice that Hermione was in the bathroom and had been crying all afternoon and didn't know about the troll. Why was she crying? Harry asked, moving fast. Ron said something in charms about her being a nightmare, Neville said, keeping pace and looking uncomfortable about the whole business. She heard. Harry processed this while covering ground. How bad is she? I don't know, I think, she's been in there for hours, she doesn't have anyone. Neville's voice had a slightly fractured quality, the voice of someone who has spent their life being the person everyone else walks past without noticing and who therefore feels someone else's invisibility acutely. Harry pushed the bathroom door open. The troll was already there. It was large in the specific way of things that have not been designed with doors in mind, too large for the space, its shoulders almost scraping the ceiling, with a club that it was bringing down on the sinks with the systematic methodology of something that was enjoying the act of destruction. Hermione was in the back corner, backed against the wall, very pale, not screaming, which Harry registered as someone in the specific paralysis that comes from the body being too frightened to make sound. Harry looked at the troll. It turned toward him with the slow, interested pivot of something that has identified a new thing to assess. The troll swung. Harry didn't dodge away from the club, he stepped forward and to the side, inside the arc of the swing, because he'd been watching it move for 3 seconds and its arc was completely predictable. The club hit the floor where he'd been standing and the impact shook the room. Harry pointed his wand at the troll's nose and said Alohomora on instinct before his brain finished the word, and then, because Alohomora was not a combat spell in any conventional sense but he was asking it to do something different, asking it to unlock the troll's nose, which was a creative interpretation but felt right, and his magic, which operated on will and intention more than technique, cooperated entirely. The unlocking charm hit the troll's left nostril and the effect was violent and immediate. The troll jerked backward, making a sound like a foghorn with something caught in it, and sat down extremely hard on the bathroom floor, shaking the walls. Hermione, Harry said, without taking his eyes off the troll, which was recovering. Get behind me and stay behind me. He heard her move. He heard Neville come in behind him. The troll got back up. Harry thought about what he knew of trolls from the chapter he'd read in a book he'd pulled from the shelves 3 weeks ago while looking for something else. Troll nervous systems were simple and their pain responses were extreme. He needed to put it down fast enough that it didn't swing again in a space this enclosed. He flicked his wand upward and said nothing, no incantation, just a direction and a sharp intention, and the 4 toilet doors in the row behind the troll blew off their hinges simultaneously and hit the troll in the back of the head, for rapid impacts like a drumroll. The troll went down face first into a sink. The sink came off the wall. The troll did not get up. The bathroom smelled terrible. There was water everywhere. The troll made a low groaning sound that suggested it was unconscious rather than dead, which was fine. Harry turned to Hermione. She was pressed against the wall behind Neville, who was standing slightly in front of her with his wand out and an expression on his face that was the specific resolved look of someone who is very frightened and has decided to be frightened and useful simultaneously rather than frightened and useless. Harry noted this and approved of it. Hermione looked at him, then at the troll, then at him. Alohomora, she said. I know, Harry said. You cast Alohomora at a troll. It worked. It's not supposed to, she started, and then stopped, and he could see her reorganizing her understanding of how his magic worked based on this new data point. The toilet doors, she said. Also worked. She let out a breath that was the specific kind of breath you let out when several months of stressful information comes to a point and the point resolves in a direction you can live with. Is anyone hurt? No, Neville said, with a slightly wondering quality. He was looking at the unconscious troll and at Harry with equal parts relief and fascination. The teachers arrived shortly after, McGonagall, Snape, Quirrell. McGonagall's expression when she took in the bathroom, the demolished sinks, the supine troll, 3 first years standing in the wreckage, everyone entirely intact, went through several stages rapidly, culminating in something that was not quite professional composure but was trying hard to be. "Explain," she said. Ron Weasley appeared in the doorway behind the teachers, having apparently followed them, looking at the scene with his mouth open. Neville explained. He did it in the clear, factual way of someone who is reporting observations rather than constructing a narrative, and Harry thought, this is why Neville is useful, and not just because of the books. He is honest in a structural way. He reports what happened without editing it for palatability. McGonagall's gaze moved to Harry during Neville's account and stayed there through the parts about the toilet doors. Harry met her eyes. She gave him 5 points for presence of mind. She gave them all 10 points each for dealing with a troll without a teacher present. She did not question how Harry had managed to unconscious the troll without a combat spell, not because she wasn't curious but because, Harry suspected, she was the kind of person who filed things away and returned to them later. He thought she'd return to this one. Quirrell was watching Harry through all of it. The thing underneath Quirrell's surface was watching Harry with particular intensity, and Harry filed that too, into the growing section of his mental landscape labeled Voldemort, ongoing. He'd suspected something was wrong with Quirrell since his first lesson. He was increasingly certain of what. Later that night, in the Gryffindor common room, Hermione sat beside Harry at the table by the fire and said, quietly, so that only he could hear, "I know you didn't plan that." "No," Harry agreed. "But it was," she paused. "You weren't afraid of it." "Fear is useful when it tells you something you don't already know," Harry said. "I already knew the troll was a problem and I already knew what kind of problem. Fear wouldn't have added information." She looked at him for a moment. The fire was warm and the common room had that specific late evening quality of a room winding down, voices softening, tired and full and warm. "Do you get afraid?" she asked. Not unkindly. More like the question she'd been building toward since September. He thought about it honestly. "Yes," he said. "Of specific things. Of the harvesting continuing and not stopping it in time. Of not doing right by my parents' work. He paused. Of being wrong about Sirius Black." "What do you mean, wrong about him?" "I mean, what if my father was wrong? What if Sirius did it?" He looked at the fire. "I can't feel truth at that distance. I can read what's in a room in real time. I can't read documents the same way. And I want him to be innocent. That wanting could be affecting my reading of the evidence." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "The legal anomaly of no trial isn't about what he did or didn't do," she said. "That's structural. That's a violation of process regardless of guilt, and the absence of records is real and documented. You can build on that independently of whether he's innocent." Harry looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You're right." "I'm often right," she said, without particular vanity, just as a matter of record. "I know," Harry said. A pause. "Also," she said, "the toilet doors were inspired." The direct confrontation with Dumbledore happened on a Wednesday in November, which felt like a mundane day for something Harry had been planning and preparing for since September. He'd requested an appointment through the standard student channel, a note to the headmaster's office, entirely proper, with the stated purpose of asking about my family history. He received a reply that same afternoon in Dumbledore's neat, slightly flourished hand, inviting him to tea on Wednesday evening, with the warmth of a man who had been looking forward to exactly this. Harry arrived on time. Fawkes was on his perch in the corner and looked at Harry with deep orange eyes that held, Harry felt clearly, none of the emotional complexity of his owner. The phoenix simply saw him and seemed satisfied. Harry gave him a brief nod. "Harry," Dumbledore said, from behind his desk. He smiled, broad, genuine, warm. "It is very good to see you. Please, sit." "Lemon drop?" "No thank you," Harry said, and sat. He spent the first few minutes of the meeting simply receiving. That was how he thought of it, being a surface, taking in everything Dumbledore was projecting. The warmth was genuine. The affection was genuine. The benevolent intention was genuine. And underneath all of it, patient and disciplined, a sustained alertness. Dumbledore was watching him with as much care as Harry was watching Dumbledore, and doing it considerably more casually, which was impressive. "I've been reading about my family," Harry said. "Both sides." "A natural impulse," Dumbledore said. "Your parents were remarkable people. I imagine you found a great deal of interesting material." "Some of it is interesting," Harry said. "Some of it raises questions I haven't been able to answer from the school library." He looked at Dumbledore pleasantly. "I've been reading about the Evans family specifically. My mother's side. Her mother's side going back." A very slight change in the room. Nothing visible. Just an infinitesimal increase in density, the kind Harry could only feel because he was specifically looking for it. Dumbledore's smile didn't shift. It was a very good smile. "Your mother was a brilliant witch," Dumbledore said. "Her gifts were considerable, her mastery of charm work in particular was exceptional." "She was also part Fae," Harry said. A pause. Not a long one. Not dramatic. Just long enough to acknowledge that the word had been said. "A very small trace, I believe," Dumbledore said, gently, carefully. "These bloodline markers are often vanishingly minor, 45%, Harry said. He said it the way his mother had taught him to say true things in her letter, without apology and without aggression. Just as information. Just as fact. In me. Which I believe you've known since I was 2 years old." The room was very quiet. Fawkes ruffled his feathers once and went still. Dumbledore looked at Harry over his half-moon spectacles, and for the first time since Harry had sat down the performance and the reality in his face were imperfectly aligned. Not broken apart, Dumbledore was far too skilled for that. Just momentarily, fractionally, out of sync. The smile was still there. The warmth was still there. But something else was also visible, just beneath, for 2 seconds before it was controlled back into place. Interest. And something adjacent to concern. Not fear of Harry, respect for Harry. The specific recalibration of a chess player who has just discovered the piece they thought was a pawn is a different piece altogether. "You've been doing a great deal of reading," Dumbledore said. "That is admirable, Harry. Your mother had the same hunger for knowledge. It was one of the things I loved most about her." "I know," Harry said. "She wrote it down. She wrote a lot of things down." He paused, letting that land. "I found the vault." Another small pause. "Your parents were very thorough," Dumbledore said. "They were," Harry agreed. "They were also very concerned, in the last year of their lives, about some of the things they'd learned. They wrote those concerns down very carefully." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'm going to keep reading. I have a lot of sources I haven't finished yet." "Of course," Dumbledore said. His voice was the same temperature. His eyes were doing something more complex. "I hope that as you read, Harry, you will feel free to come to me with any questions. There are things I know about your parents, about your history, that I would be happy to share with you." "I appreciate that," Harry said. "I'll take you up on it." He stood. Dumbledore stood. They looked at each other across the desk, and Harry held the look for exactly as long as was comfortable before nodding once and moving for the door. "Harry," Dumbledore said. Harry turned. "You remind me very much of your mother," Dumbledore said, and the warmth in his voice was completely genuine, which made it, Harry thought, more complicated than if it hadn't been. She was also not a person who could be managed. I found it admirable in her and I find it admirable in you. He was telling Harry he knew. That he understood what this conversation had been. He was telling him with the openness of someone who believes transparency is a form of power. He was also, Harry thought, making the precise calculation that Harry was 11 years old and whatever he'd found in the vault and the library, he could not yet act on. That he was clever but young and that youth was its own limitation. Harry smiled at him, not the polite social smile he'd been wearing through the meeting but a genuine one, which was different because it was brief and quiet and didn't reach for anything. "Good night, Professor," he said. He walked back down the moving staircase and through the corridors to Gryffindor Tower and sat at the table by the window and wrote 3 pages of notes on the meeting, capturing every word, every inflection, every pause. He wrote, "He knows I know. He is not afraid. He believes I am too young to act and that time is on his side. He may be right about the time. He is wrong about the acting." He wrote, "He is going to create a situation. I need to find it before it finds me." He closed the notebook. Through the window, the grounds of Hogwarts were dark and cold and enormous, and somewhere beneath them the school's ancient feywork sang its low steady note, recognized and present, patient as stone. Harry listened to it for a while. Then he went to bed. Chapter 4, Sirius. The problem with Azkaban was that it was designed to make you forget you were a person. Sirius Black had spent 11 years remembering anyway. It was harder some days than others. The Dementors took the good memories first, the bright ones, James laughing at something terrible, Lily's expression when she was working through a problem that interested her, the smell of the Gryffindor common room in winter, the particular weight of a motorbike at speed. Those went first because they were the most worth taking. What was left was the rest of it, the less luminous archive, and Sirius had learned to live in that. He'd also learned something about the Dementors that he suspected most prisoners never got far enough into their own heads to notice. The despair they generated was a projection, an imposition, not a truth. It felt like truth. It felt like the truest thing in the world, lying in that cell, the cold absolute certainty that nothing good had ever existed and nothing good would ever be true again. But it was imposed. It was coming from outside. An innocent man, Sirius had discovered, had a particular relationship with that knowledge. Not immunity, nothing was immunity. But a specific kind of resistance that came from the fact that the Dementor's projection never quite perfectly overlaid the actual record. There was always a gap, small and cold and real, between what they were projecting and what Sirius Black actually knew to be true, and in that gap he'd lived for 11 years. He'd also kept the animagus form, which the Dementors couldn't reach as deeply as the human one, and spent enough time as a dog that the distinction between surviving and existing had stayed navigable. He was in his human form on the morning in December when the letter arrived, because letters arrived for human hands and he'd learned to cycle back regularly, keep the form available. The letters he received were occasional and official, ministry documentation, bureaucratic maintenance of his confinement, and he opened them with the mechanical indifference of someone who has learned to expect nothing from envelopes. This envelope was different. It wasn't ministry parchment. It was cream-colored and slightly heavier than standard, with no seal and no return address. His name was written on it in a hand he didn't recognize, young, with the slightly over-precise lettering of someone who had recently been taught formal penmanship and was still applying it consciously. He held it for a moment before opening it, because 11 years in Azkaban gave you a finely developed instinct for anything out of pattern, and this was very much out of pattern. The letter was 3 pages long. Dear Sirius, my name is Harry. I think you know whose son I am. I'm going to tell you several things, and I imagine some of them are going to be very difficult to read in a cell in Azkaban, so I want to say first, I'm all right. I have been managed and used and kept from information that was mine and I am very angry about all of those things, but I am physically unhurt. I am at Hogwarts, I have found my parents' vault and my mother's letter and the book they wrote together, and I have allies I trust. I am not all right the way I would have been if things had gone differently, but I'm the kind of all right that is building towards something. I want you to know that before the rest." He had to stop for a moment. The Dementor at the end of the corridor moved with a slow, dragging quality, and the despair projection intensified briefly and then ebbed. Sirius breathed through it. He kept his eyes on the letter. "I believe you are innocent. I want to be clear about the basis for that belief, because I have learned to be careful about the difference between what I feel and what I can prove. My father wrote about Peter Pettigrew in the last year of his life. He wrote about the doubts he had. He wrote them carefully and specifically, the way he wrote everything in that year, like someone building evidence. His account, combined with the legal anomaly of your imprisonment without trial, and combined with certain other information I've assembled, makes a case I believe is strong. Not yet actionable. But strong. I am working on actionable. I need to know two things that I believe only you can tell me. First, who was the real secret keeper? My father's notes suggest Pettigrew, but he wasn't certain. He was working from observation and instinct. You know. Second, what do you know about the Ward of Absolute Peace? Whether you know what that is, whether you know that Dumbledore has been researching it, whether my parents told you about Aelindra and the Right. I have a great many other questions, but those are the load-bearing ones. The answers to those will tell me how to sequence what comes next. I know this letter is asking a great deal of someone in your position. I know reading it, if the Dementors are any proximity, is going to be difficult. I am sorry for that. I am trying to move quickly and I need your help. I'm going to get you out. I don't know exactly how yet, but I've been working on the legal architecture for 2 months and I have help. This is not a reassurance, it's a statement of intent. Please write back if you can. Harry Sirius read it 3 times. Then he sat down on the floor of his cell, the floor was stone and cold and filthy, and laughed, which he hadn't done in years, a real laugh, not the thin desperate sound that occasionally escaped when things became too absurd to take seriously. This was a real laugh. Surprised out of him. James's boy. James and Lily's boy, writing from Hogwarts in his first year, with the precise systematic cadence of Lily's mind and the bone-deep stubbornness of James's and something underneath both of them that was neither, something older and stranger. He got out his own paper and wrote back immediately. The correspondence took 3 weeks and was, by necessity, carefully coded. Sirius used a cipher James had taught him in 5th year that wouldn't have defeated a determined Ministry cryptographer but wasn't meant to. It was meant to be readable quickly and plausibly deniable as gibberish from a madman, which the Ministry tended to accept because it confirmed what they already thought about him. Harry had apparently intuited that some kind of misdirection was necessary, because his second letter arrived in a modified form that Sirius recognized as a fair resonance concealment, the words visible only when the parchment was warm, readable only by someone who had made skin contact with the sender. Sirius had pressed his palm to the page and the text had bloomed silver green, and he'd felt something at the base of his sternum that was the specific feeling of being inside something extraordinary watching it happen. 45%. He'd known about the Right, James and Lily had written to him about it, a short letter that had arrived in late August 1982 with the restrained tone of people who were frightened and doing their best not to be, telling him what Aelindra had said and what Dumbledore was researching and asking him not to put it in writing any further. Don't respond with specifics, just know that we know and if something happens you know too. Something had happened. He confirmed what Harry needed, Pettigrew had been the real secret keeper. The switch had been James's idea, a misdirect, they'd thought, a brilliant one, Sirius the obvious target for Voldemort's agents and Pettigrew the invisible one, loyal, overlooked, unmemorable. Sirius had agreed to the swap and told no one, not even Dumbledore, which in retrospect was either the smartest or the most catastrophic thing he'd ever not done. He didn't know what Pettigrew had been offered. Power, almost certainly. Survival, definitely. Pettigrew had always been most afraid of dying and most easily bought by the promise of not dying. He told Harry about the Ward research. Yes, he'd known about it. James had told him in the weeks before, had told him that he was worried Dumbledore's interest in Harry went past the political, that there was something else there, that Lily had called it managed proximity and that phrase had stayed with Sirius because it was so precisely Lily. She had always named things exactly. He also told Harry something he hadn't told anyone, a small specific thing he'd been carrying for 11 years, the night of the attack, before he'd reached Godric's Hollow, he'd passed Dumbledore. On the road outside the village. They'd exchanged a look, nothing more, and Dumbledore had been coming from the direction of the cottage. He'd been there already. He'd arrived before Sirius, before Hagrid, before anyone, in the immediate aftermath. He had been the first person to reach Harry. Sirius had never had anyone to tell this to. He wrote it down now and sent it with the warmth of something long held finally given somewhere to go. Harry received Sirius's third letter on a Tuesday morning in December, read it at breakfast, folded it away, and said nothing. He finished his porridge. He went to Transfiguration. He sat through McGonagall's lesson on the theory of partial transformations with the focused attention he brought to everything, asked one question at the end that made her pause and then answer with the particular care she reserved for questions that were more interesting than she'd been expecting. After class Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor and said, "You got another one?" "Yes." "And?" He told her the most significant parts. Pettigrew confirmed as secret keeper, the road outside Godric's Hollow, Dumbledore's first arrival. Hermione was quiet for the length of the corridor, which with Hermione meant significant processing was occurring. "The road outside the village," she said finally. "Yes." He was already there. He was there and leaving. Sirius passed him on the road going in as Dumbledore was going out. Harry looked straight ahead. Which means he was at the cottage before Hagrid arrived. Before anyone official arrived. Before any of the reconstruction of events happened. He could have arrived after, Hermione said, not arguing for it, just checking the structure. Come and gone before Hagrid. He could have, Harry said. Hagrid said Dumbledore gave him the order to collect Harry and bring him to the Dursleys, that same night. Which means Dumbledore had been there, assessed the situation, determined what he wanted done with Harry, and gone. All before anyone else arrived. He paused. First thing he did, in the immediate aftermath of two people dying, was establish control of the survivor. The primary blood source, Hermione said, with a flatness in her voice. Yes. She was quiet again. Then, Harry. Sirius's testimony, written from Azkaban in a coded letter, isn't going to be enough. You know that. I know. We need him out of Azkaban before his testimony is worth anything in a formal proceeding. I know. And getting him out requires, she stopped. They'd been over this multiple times, the architecture of it, the legal requirements, the specific problem of a man imprisoned without trial who had therefore never been convicted, which meant the mechanism for getting him released was theoretically simpler than an appeal but practically more complex because nobody had a strong interest in examining the anomaly. We need someone at the ministry level with enough standing to force a review. And we need Pettigrew. Pettigrew, Harry said, is not dead. She looked at him. My father's notes and Sirius's letters agree on one thing, the body wasn't right. 12 muggles and Sirius's wand and a finger. Not a body. Pettigrew was an animagus. He could have faked the death and left. He paused. If he's alive, which I believe, he'll be somewhere he feels safe. Somewhere near his connections to Voldemort, who is not fully dead, or somewhere as far from anything connected to that life as possible. That's not a particularly narrow search area, Hermione said. No, Harry agreed. But Pettigrew is a rat animagus. Unregistered. Which means someone is probably sheltering him without knowing what he is. He looked at her sideways. There's a very simple detection charm for unregistered animagi. It's in the restricted section, level 4 wards. I accessed it yesterday. Of course you did, she said. I've been thinking about how you'd hide if you were Pettigrew. You'd stay small, stay close to someone who wouldn't think to examine their pets. Probably a magical family, where a rat wouldn't be unusual. He paused. Probably somewhere I could actually check. Hermione stopped walking. Harry. Don't do anything ridiculous. I haven't done anything ridiculous yet. The toilet door thing, that was improvised, he said. This is planned. He started walking again. I need about 2 more weeks. And I need Neville's grandmother's barrister contact. She said she'd give it to us at Christmas. Good. I need it sooner. Hermione pulled out her notebook and wrote something. I'll write to her today, she said. Augusta Longbottom's solicitor was a goblin-affiliated wizard named Aldrich Moss who operated out of a narrow office in Diagon Alley that smelled aggressively of old parchment and took clients by appointment only. He was 63 years old, thin as a rail, with the specific economy of movement of a man who has decided every action should have a purpose and has lived by that decision for decades. He had worked primarily in inheritance law and ancient rights claims for 30 years, with a sideline in treaty violation cases that involved the older magics. He had never lost a case he'd chosen to take. He appeared at Hogwarts in the second week of December by Flo, at Harry's written request, with the Gringotts contact copied in the letter. Professor McGonagall, who received the request for visitor access, had looked at it for a long moment before approving it. Harry could feel, from across the room when he'd handed her the note, the specific quality of her attention sharpening, questions forming that she wasn't yet asking. He met Moss in a small study room near the library with Hermione present, because she'd been part of building the case and he trusted her read of people. Moss sat down, put his briefcase on the table, looked at Harry for 4 seconds, and said, "The Gringotts contact tells me this concerns a Feyblood treaty violation, a wrongful imprisonment, and a potential magical rights abuse case against the headmaster of this school. Before you begin, do you have documentation?" 3 notebooks, Harry said, a sealed vault record, my mother's written account, my father's case file, Gringotts' own query records, and correspondence from the imprisoned party that details the specific facts of the secret keeper arrangement. Moss looked at the 3 notebooks Harry placed on the table. He looked at Hermione's too. He said, "How old are you?" 11, Harry said. A pause. Your mother was Lily Evans. Potter. Yes. I reviewed a case of hers once. An academic paper she wrote on Feyblood detection in heritage claims. She was 22. He opened the top notebook. I'll need an hour. Harry and Hermione went to the library and came back at the end of the hour. Moss was on the second notebook. He held up a hand without looking up. They went back to the library. He finished at the end of the second hour and sat back in his chair with the expression of someone who has read a document that has altered their professional landscape in ways they are still calibrating. He looked at Harry. He looked at Hermione. The Feyblood Treaty of 1612, he said, prohibits the unlicensed extraction of Fey resonant blood from any individual carrying measurable Fey heritage, regardless of awareness or consent. Violation is a Gringotts jurisdiction matter as well as a ministry one, because Gringotts is the treaty's registered keeper. He paused. The treaty does not require proof of completed extraction. Evidence of extraction apparatus, in this case, blood wards specifically designed to harvest Fey resonant material, is sufficient for a formal complaint. We have the ward structure documented, Hermione said. Harry's description of the pulling sensation, dated and specific, cross-referenced with the timeline of the ward's installation. Subjective testimony, Moss said. Powerful but not sufficient alone. I'll need a ward analyst to examine the Privet Drive house. The wards were taken down when Harry started at Hogwarts, Harry said. The Gringotts records show the vault was queried twice, the second time 3 months before Harry's first year. Whatever was at the house may have been modified in advance. Moss made a note. Gringotts can establish the query record as independent evidence of attempted access by a third party. That combined with the vault's Feyblood lock design, your mother knew what she was protecting against, and the vault design is itself a document of her awareness, strengthens the civil case considerably. He looked up. The wrongful imprisonment case is a different matter. Stronger in some ways. Sirius Black's imprisonment without trial is a procedural violation that the Ministry cannot easily defend. The question is whether anyone with standing to bring the motion has the motivation to do so. I have standing, Harry said. As his intended godson and as a documented beneficiary in the Potter estate, I have standing to petition for review of actions taken in the immediate aftermath of my parents' deaths, including the decision to imprison someone without trial. Moss looked at him. That argument holds, he said. It requires filing with the Wisengamot directly, bypassing the standard Ministry channels, which avoids Dumbledore's influence at the ministerial level. He paused. The Wisengamot is not free of his influence either. I know, Harry said. But it's more distributed. He can't control every vote. If the documentation is solid enough members will want the process respected regardless of the outcome. He paused. And if Pettigrew is alive, and we can produce him, the imprisonment case becomes airtight. Moss looked at him again with the expression Harry was getting used to from capable adults, the look of someone recalibrating a conversation they had come in thinking they understood. Where is Pettigrew? I have a strong theory, Harry said. I need a few weeks and a detection charm. A pause. Mr. Potter, Moss said, I am going to need you to not do anything that creates a legal complication for the case before I've had the chance to file the initial petition. I understand the concern, Harry said. I'm going to find Pettigrew through entirely legitimate means. Moss looked at Hermione. Hermione said, with the equanimity of someone who has made her peace with the situation, that's probably true. The detection charm required standing at the center of the Gryffindor common room on a Thursday evening and pointing his wand at the fireplace and saying 5 words in Latin while pushing his magic outward in a slow even pulse, the way you'd roll a wave across still water. He'd practiced the push 3 times in the room of requirement, which had opened for him the second time he walked past it, no triple walk required, just a clear need and the school's Feywork cooperating, until he was confident in the even distribution. Neville had cleared the common room on the basis of a story about a practical charms assignment that was believable enough because he looked appropriately anxious about it. Hermione stood to Harry's left, notebook open. Trevor the Toad was in the corner. 3 other animals were in the room, a first-year girl's black cat, another student's owl sleeping in its cage, and 1 rat. The rat was sitting on the arm of Ron Weasley's chair. Ron was not in the room. Ron had gone down to the kitchens with Fred and George, which Harry had noted and factored in, because he needed Ron absent for this part. Ron was a friend, a genuine one, and what was about to happen was going to be difficult for him. Harry intended to have the case solid enough before Ron found out that the difficulty had somewhere productive to go. Harry cast the charm. The pulse went out, a slow silver-green ripple that moved across the room like light through water. The black cat looked up, blinked, went back to sleep. The owl didn't stir. The rat convulsed. Not dramatically. Not with any theatrical transformation. Just a full-body spasm, as if every muscle had contracted and then released, followed by a high thin sound that was not quite a rat sound and then a second convulsion that was slightly longer than the first. The rat leaped from the chair's arm and ran for the corner and then stopped, because Harry had already placed a containment ward on the room's perimeter, which the rat hit like a wall and bounced back from, and then it sat very still in the middle of the hearthrug looking at Harry with eyes that were a very specific kind of frightened, the kind that knows it's been caught. "Hello, Peter," Harry said. The rat looked at him. "You can stay in that form if you prefer," Harry said. "It doesn't change what's happening. I have a binding ward on the room, I have a witness, and I have documentation of your animagus form in an official record that I'll be providing to a solicitor within the week." He crouched down to the rat's level, resting his arms on his knees, looking at it. "Here's what I want you to understand. Sirius Black is in Azkaban because everyone assumed you were dead. You're not dead. You've been living as a rat in a child's pocket for," he glanced at Hermione. "Ron got Scabbers from Percy," Hermione said. "Percy had him for 3 years before that. Minimum 5 years, possibly 6. Minimum 5 years, Harry said to the rat. Here is the situation. If you stay in that form and I hand you to the ministry in that form, the first thing they'll do is restore you as a witness, because they'll need your testimony. You'll have no control over what happens. If you transform voluntarily, right now, you have the option of cooperation, which I am offering, and cooperation has better legal outcomes than capture. He paused. I'm 11 years old. I shouldn't have to be having this conversation. But here we are. The rat looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a slow horrible reluctance, it began to change. The transformation was not like the smooth shift of a confident animagus. It was jagged and protesting, the body fighting it even as it performed it, bones extending, fur receding, hands forming over paws with an awful wet sound. What emerged, crouched on the Gryffindor hearth rug, was a short, balding man with small watery eyes and the look of someone who has been afraid for so long that it has become structural. He was trembling. He was looking at Harry with an expression that contained guilt and fear in equal measure, and underneath both of them something else, a flicker of recognition. The same recognition that James's son was James and Lily in equal measure, and that James's son had apparently become a force of nature that Pettigrew, who had always been a coward more than an evil man, did not have the capacity to face down. Harry, he said. His voice was the voice of a man who knows he is out of options. I want you to know, I never wanted, I know you didn't want it to go the way it went, Harry said. He was not performing gentleness but he was not performing hardness either. He was simply looking at the man who had sold his parents with the clear specific attention of someone assembling a picture. You were afraid of Voldemort and you thought he was going to win and you thought you had to choose between dying with them or surviving without them and you chose to survive. He paused. I'm not here to judge that. I'm here because Sirius Black is in Azkaban for what you did. That's the thing that needs correcting. Pettigrew was crying now, silently, in the ugly way of someone not performing it. You're going to give a full account to Aldrich Moss, Harry said. Including the secret keeper arrangement, including what happened that night, including where you've been. You're going to do it voluntarily because voluntary cooperation is your best legal position. He paused. And then Sirius gets out. Moss arrived the next morning and took Pettigrew's testimony in the same study room, with Hermione's notes and Harry's documentation and 2 Gringotts representatives who had portkeyed in for the occasion, which was a level of institutional weight that Harry had carefully arranged because he wanted witnesses whose testimony could not be legally dismissed as having any stake in the outcome. Harry did not sit in on the testimony. He waited in the corridor. Neville came and found him at some point and they sat on the floor of the corridor outside the study room with their backs against the wall and didn't talk much, which was fine. Neville was the kind of company who understood that some situations required presence rather than words, which was one of the things Harry valued most about him. After about an hour Neville said, "Are you going to tell McGonagall?" "Not yet," Harry said. "I need the petition filed first. Once it's in front of the Wisengamot it has a legal identity and interfering with it is a separate crime. I want it filed before anyone who might want to interfere finds out it exists." "How long does filing take?" "Moss says 4 to 7 days for acceptance. Once accepted, a review hearing is mandatory, they can't refuse to schedule one." Harry looked at the stone wall opposite. "I want Sirius at Christmas." Neville looked at him sideways. "You're serious?" Harry looked back at him. "I've been planning this since September." A pause. "Right," Neville said. "Yeah. Of course you have." He was quiet for a moment. "My Gran is going to," he started, and then seemed to not have words for what Augusta Longbottom was going to do, settling on, "She's going to be very intense about meeting you." "Good," Harry said. "I need someone who's been reading Fey lore for 50 years and is very intense about it." Ron Weasley found them in the corridor at the end of the morning, back from the kitchens and holding 3 pastries in a slightly precarious stack, and looked at them on the floor with the expression of someone who has walked into a situation with a specific atmosphere he doesn't understand but is choosing not to interrogate. He sat down next to Neville and offered pastries around. "What are we doing?" he said. Waiting, Neville said. For what? Harry considered how much to say. Ron was a friend. Ron was also the person whose rat had just been transformed back into a man who had been responsible for 12 deaths and the unjust imprisonment of someone's godfather, and none of Ron's family knew any of that. Harry thought about pacing, about what information when, about the fact that Ron deserved to know but the knowing was going to need handling. Something important, Harry said. I'll tell you everything when I can. Soon. Ron looked at him and did the specific thing he'd been doing since the train, accepting things at face value, proceeding on trust, not pushing. It was, Harry thought, one of Ron's actual gifts, that trust that was not naivety but a kind of practiced generosity. Ron Weasley extended the assumption of good faith as a default and then updated from there. It was, in a world where Harry was surrounded by people who had been managing him for his entire life, remarkably refreshing. Right, Ron said, eating a pastry. Important. Got it. Moss filed the petition on the 17th of December. He also sent a copy to the Gringotts legal team, who attached the treaty violation documentation as a supplementary filing that connected the two cases, the wrongful imprisonment and the blood harvesting, into a single legal framework that was much harder to address on one front without addressing the other. It was, Moss told Harry over Flo in a brief call, one of the cleaner cases he'd assembled in 30 years. Will it work? Harry asked. The wrongful imprisonment case is nearly airtight, Moss said. The treaty violation case is more complex and will take longer. But the filing creates a record. Once there is a record, everything done to suppress it becomes part of the record. He paused. I should tell you, and I say this as a professional, not a commentary on your judgment, that the headmaster will become aware of the filing within days of acceptance. Probably sooner. He has contacts in the Wizengamot. I know, Harry said. And you are not concerned. I'm very concerned, Harry said. I'm just not going to let the concern stop the process. He paused. The case is in the legal record now. Whatever he does, it'll be visible. Moss looked at him for a moment over the green-tinged Flo connection. Your mother would have made an extraordinary solicitor, he said. Harry thought of the 9-page letter, the vault, the book with his father's bracketed commentary. He thought of Lily Potter who had died throwing herself forward between her child and the thing that was coming. She made an extraordinary mother, Harry said. He closed the connection. That evening, at dinner, he looked down the length of the hall at the staff table and found Dumbledore already looking at him. The warmth was there, as always. The benevolent regard. But underneath it now, for the first time, something else, a careful, attentive alertness that hadn't been there before. He'd felt the filing. Or someone had told him. And he was reassessing. Harry held his eyes across the great hall and picked up his fork and ate his dinner. He felt good. He felt, specifically, the satisfaction of someone who has done a difficult thing correctly, not easily, not without cost, but correctly. The architecture of it solid. The record existing. Tomorrow he was going home with the Longbottoms for Christmas. Sirius Black's review hearing had been scheduled for the 22nd of December. He had 8 days. Chapter 5, The Ward of Absolute Peace. Augusta Longbottom's house was called Longbottom Hall, which was either unimaginative or honest depending on how you felt about names, and it sat in the Yorkshire countryside like something that had grown there rather than been built. 3 stories of grey stone with an annex on the left that had clearly been added by someone who was less concerned with aesthetic consistency than with having another room, surrounded by gardens that were enormous and somewhat untamed, the kind of gardens that gave the impression of having their own opinions about where things should grow. Harry liked it immediately. Augusta herself was waiting at the door when the ministry car pulled up, which Harry suspected was not her standard practice for guests and was entirely her standard practice for this guest. She was a tall woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back severely and the precise posture of someone who had decided decades ago that the world was generally disappointing but could be managed through sufficient backbone. She was wearing robes in a dark green that suited her and a hat that did not suit anyone but that she wore with the absolute conviction of someone who has never questioned their own taste. She looked at Harry for a long moment as he got out of the car. He looked back. "You have her eyes," Augusta said. "Lily Evans's eyes. I saw her once at a ministry function in 1979. She had the quality of taking up the right amount of space. Not more than she needed, not less." A pause. "You have that." "Thank you," Harry said. "It wasn't entirely a compliment," Augusta said. "People who take up exactly the right amount of space tend to cause a disproportionate amount of trouble." She stepped back from the door. "Come in. I've made tea and we have a great deal to discuss, and I intend to discuss all of it before Neville asks you to play Exploding Snap, which he will." Neville, behind Harry, made a sound. The house was warm and dense with the specific quality of a place that has been inhabited by the same family for a very long time, bookshelves on every wall with a variety of that only comes from multiple generations of reading, photographs that moved and occasionally argued with each other, a fireplace in the main sitting room large enough to stand in that was burning something that smelled like cedar and old paper. A portrait of a woman Harry didn't recognize watched him from above the mantel with an expression of concentrated interest. "My grandmother," Augusta said, following his gaze. "Half Fae. The last one in the direct line before you." She looked at the portrait. She would have been, she paused, she would have been very pleased. The portrait of the woman smiled slightly. Augusta poured tea with the efficiency of someone for whom tea was a functional rather than ceremonial act and got directly to business. "The Sorrendal Pax," she said. "You know what it is." "I have the charter records," Harry said. "Salander's theoretical appendices. I know the requirements, the mechanism, the likely locus. I know how much has been collected and roughly how much remains." He paused. "What I don't know is the exact triggering sequence. The appendices are incomplete in that specific area." Augusta looked at him. "That is because the complete triggering sequence was not in any document Salander put in writing," she said. "He was a careful craftsman. He didn't want the ward built accidentally, or by someone who'd found a partial text and thought they understood the whole of it." She reached behind her to the bookshelf and pulled a slim volume that had the look of something very old that had been rebound relatively recently, the content old, the covering new, something someone had decided was worth preserving carefully. "This is Salander's personal record. My grandmother's grandmother copied it in 1743 from a text that has since been lost. It has been in this family for 300 years. She put it on the table between them. It contains the complete triggering sequence." Harry looked at it without touching it. "Does Dumbledore know this exists?" "No," Augusta said. "Or if he suspects, he has no way to access it. It is not in any public catalogue. It has never been listed or documented outside this family." She paused. "I'm giving it to you." "Why?" Harry asked. Not skeptically. Genuinely wanting to know her reasoning, the structure of it. "Because the person who understands the complete triggering sequence is also the person best positioned to dismantle the working, if it is ever initiated," Augusta said. "And because a weapon you have chosen to give someone is considerably less dangerous than a weapon they might take from you." She held his gaze. "And because my grandmother's portrait has been waiting for this specific conversation for as long as I can remember, and I would like to stop having the expression she makes when something she expected hasn't happened yet." Harry glanced at the portrait. The woman in it was giving him an expression of contained impatience that was very recognizable as a family trait. He picked up the book. The content hit him the moment his hands made contact, not an explosion, not a dramatic magical event, just a deep immediate resonance, like an instrument recognizing a key. The text inside was partly in Old Fae, partly in a cipher, and partly in a third thing that wasn't quite either, a kind of encoded intention, a text that wanted to be read by the right person and had been waiting for one. The words arranged themselves as he read them, the cipher portions resolving without conscious effort, the old Fae translating in the same way the word Arundel had translated on the train. Like a language he'd always known and not known he knew. He read it twice, there at Augusta's table, drinking his tea. The triggering sequence required three things: the collected blood, applied to the Hogwarts foundation stones directly, at a specific point where Salander's Fae work was most densely concentrated, a spoken invocation in Old Fae that locked the blood into the ward structure, and the ongoing living presence of the blood source within the ward's boundary. The source could not leave. The ward would keep them in as surely as it kept conflict out. Harry would be the anchor. Not just for the building of it. Forever. The ward of absolute peace would pin him to Hogwarts, to Britain, a living battery feeding a compulsion into every magical person in the country, for as long as he lived. He set the book down. Permanently, he said. Yes, Augusta said. He sat with that for a moment. Not with fear exactly, the thing he felt was colder and more specific than fear. It was the particular sensation of understanding the full shape of something. He had known it was bad. He hadn't known the specific dimension of it, the permanent dimension, the loss of every future he might otherwise have in exchange for being the engine of someone else's vision of peace. He believes it's the right thing to do, Harry said. Yes, Augusta said. That is the most dangerous part of it. Harry looked at the fire for a moment. How do you dismantle it, if it's been initiated? The blood source severs connection with the ward, Augusta said. Which is not something a non-Fae could do. Standard magic cannot sever a Fae blood working from the inside. But a Fae-blooded individual of sufficient concentration, with full understanding of the workings architecture, she paused. Could walk out of it. Literally. Walk out and take the anchor with them. The ward collapses without the living source. I could dismantle it even after it was built. If you understood the architecture fully, Augusta said. Which you now do. Harry picked up the book again and looked at it. I need to copy this. I brought copying parchment, Augusta said, and produced it from beside her chair with the efficiency of someone who has thought about this meeting for a very long time. Neville had been quiet through all of it, sitting to Harry's right with his hands wrapped around his mug, listening. Now he said, Gran. Does Dumbledore know that the anchor can sever the connection from the inside? Augusta paused. That is an excellent question, she said, and the honest answer is I don't know. Salander's appendices, the ones in the Hogwarts Charter, are incomplete in exactly that area. Which means Dumbledore may be working from a partial understanding of the mechanism. She looked at Harry. He may believe, once the ward is built, that it is permanent regardless of what you do. Which means he may underestimate what I can do to it, Harry said. Yes. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked back at him with the expression of someone who has been reading the right books all his life and is watching the reason for it become clear. Copy fast, Neville said. Harry copied fast. The Wizengamot Review hearing for Sirius Orion Black was held on the 22nd of December in a chamber that smelled of old wood and procedural gravity, with 47 members present out of a possible 52 and a legal record that had been formally accepted on the 19th. Which meant it had existed for 3 days and everyone in that chamber had read it and the room had the specific energy of a body that has been handed a problem it cannot ignore. Moss had been exact about the access. Harry was not permitted in the chamber itself. He was 11, he was the petitioner by standing but not a participant in the hearing's formal proceedings, but Moss had arranged a spelled gallery above the chamber floor from which he could observe, which was sufficient. He sat in the gallery with Hermione on his left and Augusta on his right and watched the proceedings with the focused attention he brought to everything. Pettigrew's testimony had been submitted as written record, verified by 3 independent witnesses including the Gringotts representatives. The Ministry's inability to produce trial records for Sirius Black's imprisonment was entered into evidence as a procedural violation. The secret keeper arrangement, confirmed by both Pettigrew's account and the secondary documentation from James Potter's notes, was entered. The timeline of events on the night of October 31st was entered. It took 4 hours. At the end of 4 hours, the Waisengemot voted 31-16 to order Sirius Black's immediate release pending a full investigation into the circumstances of his imprisonment. 31-16 was not a close vote. Harry sat in the gallery and felt the verdict land with the specific physical sensation of something long held being released, a knot undone. Hermione beside him let out a breath that she'd apparently been holding for some time. Augusta made no sound at all, but when Harry looked at her the line of her jaw was less severe than it had been. The full investigation will take time, Moss said to Harry in the corridor afterward, his briefcase under his arm, precise and satisfied. The release is immediate. The investigation into who authorized an imprisonment without trial, and why, will not be. But it is happening. He paused. The headmaster will know the outcome within the hour. Good, Harry said. You want him to know. I want him to know the board is in play, Harry said. I want him recalibrating. He paused. He's a strategic thinker. A patient one. If I take away his time margin, he'll have to adapt his approach, and an adapted approach is messier than a planned one. Moss looked at him with the expression Harry was used to from him now. I'll have the treaty violation case ready to file formally in January, he said. The preliminary evidence submission went to Gringotts this morning. Thank you, Harry said. Moss did a slight thing that might, from a different man, have been a bow. Don't get injured before January, he said. Particularly not in ways that require extended contact with the headmaster. Working on it, Harry said. Sirius arrived at Longbottom Hall at 6 o'clock in the evening, escorted by 2 ministry officials who were professionally blank about the fact that they were releasing a man who had just spent 11 years in Azkaban on the basis of documentation assembled by an 11-year-old. The officials left. The door closed. Sirius stood in Augusta Longbottom's entrance hall in clothes that didn't fit because no one had thought to bring him anything to change into before the hearing, thin in the way of someone who has been underfed for years, with the long grey-streaked dark hair of someone who hasn't had access to a barber, and he looked around the entrance hall with the specific expression of a person encountering a room that is not a cell, taking inventory of that fact. Harry was at the top of the stairs. Sirius looked up and found him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Sirius had a face that was harder to read than most, not because he was closed but because the surface of it had been shaped by 11 years of conditions that left their own marks, and underneath those marks was a person Harry had only ever known through his parents' words and his own correspondence. He was looking at Sirius and Sirius was looking at him, and they were both doing the same thing, Harry thought, making the real person match the picture. Resolving the actual against the imagined. Sirius said, "You look like your father." "I know," Harry said. "Everyone says that." "You have your mother's," Sirius started, and stopped. "Eyes," Harry said. "I know that too." A pause. Then Sirius said, with a slightly fractured quality in his voice that he was not quite managing to control, "You wrote me a letter in December." "I write letters when I need information," Harry said. It said. Sirius paused. He looked at the stairs. At Harry. The fractured quality was getting less controlled rather than more, which was fine. "It said you were going to get me out." "I said it was a statement of intent," Harry said, "not a reassurance." He came down the stairs. "There's a difference." Sirius looked at him from 3 feet away, close enough now that Harry could feel the emotional landscape of him clearly, the grief and the relief and the guilt and the astonishment, all of it live and immediate, no layer of performance or management over any of it. Sirius Black had spent 11 years in a place specifically designed to strip away every self-protective mechanism, and what was left was purely himself, everything raw and present and undisguised. Harry had spent his life reading emotional truth, and he was reading it now, and what he read was, "This man loved my parents absolutely, lost them absolutely, and has been carrying that loss in a cell for 11 years. He didn't think about it. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Sirius Black and held on. There was a pause of about 2 seconds, surprise, Harry thought, the surprise of someone who was not expecting it, and then Sirius's arms came up and he held on back, with the grip of someone who has been cold for a very long time and has found something warm, and the sound he made against the top of Harry's head was not crying exactly but was adjacent to it, was in the same country as it. They stood there in Augusta Longbottom's entrance hall for a while. Neville appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, looked at them, and quietly went back inside. The 4 days between the 22nd and the 26th were the best 4 days Harry could remember having, which was not a high bar given his previous history but was genuine regardless. Sirius ate 3 meals a day with the concentration of someone rediscovering what food was supposed to be like. He slept 14 hours the first night and 12 the second and looked more human every morning, the sharpness returning to his face as the physical deficit started to be addressed. They talked. They talked a great deal, in the long evenings in Augusta's sitting room with the fire going and tea on the table and Neville occasionally contributing from behind whatever book he was currently in. They talked about James and Lily with the specific fluency of people sharing a subject they both loved and had never had sufficient audience for. Sirius had stories Harry had never heard. Harry had his parents' written words, the ones they'd left in the vault, and he read sections to Sirius who sat and listened with an expression that was grief and gratitude in equal measure. He also told Sirius everything. The full picture, the harvesting, the ward architecture, the triggering sequence from Salander's personal record, the current state of the legal filings. Sirius listened to all of it with the focused attention of a trained orar, and when Harry finished he was quiet for a long moment. He genuinely believes in it, Sirius said finally. That's the thing. I knew him for 20 years and the war did something to him. The losses. He has this vision of a world without the losses, without the kind of violence that took James and Lily, and he has convinced himself that any means is justified by the end. He's not lying to himself. He really thinks he's right. He paused. That's what makes him dangerous. You can't appeal to his conscience about this because his conscience is fully on board. I know, Harry said. I'm not going to appeal to his conscience. I'm going to remove his ability to proceed. The legal filings. The legal filings are part of it, Harry said. The other part is what we're doing right now, assembling enough people who know the full picture that he can't isolate the information or the action. He looked at Sirius. When Pettigrew's full testimony becomes public record, the ministry will have to investigate. That investigation will include the night of my parents' deaths. It will include the road outside Godric's Hollow. Sirius looked at him sharply. You know about that. You told me. In your third letter. Harry held his gaze. He was there first. He took what he needed from the cottage before anyone else arrived. He made sure I was placed where I would be accessible. All of that is documented. He paused. His involvement in the aftermath of my parents' deaths will be examined. That's not a threat. It's the legal record working the way it's supposed to. Sirius was quiet for a moment. He'll fight it. He'll try to manage it, Harry said. There's a difference. Managing something requires believing you still have sufficient control of the moving pieces. He's been operating on the assumption that he does. Every filing, every piece of documentation, every person who now knows the full picture, that's one more piece he doesn't control. He paused. He's going to have to act before he's ready. Which means he'll try to access you directly, Sirius said, with the sharpness of someone who has snapped from personal to tactical. Yes, Harry said. Before January if possible, because January is when the treaty violation case files formally. Sirius looked at him. What's at Hogwarts? On the 3rd floor. Harry looked back at him. He hadn't mentioned the 3rd floor. You know about that. I know Dumbledore had something moved there in August, Sirius said. I have a contact, in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes who heard something about a significant protective detail arranged for a high-value object. The nature of the object I don't know. He paused. But Dumbledore arranging for a high-value object to be kept at Hogwarts in the same year you arrived is not a coincidence, Harry said. What's on the 3rd floor? I don't know yet, Harry said. I felt it. The foundational magic has something strange around that area, a specific warding layer that doesn't feel like Salander's work. More recent. More deliberate. He paused. I've been prioritizing the legal case and the ward research. But I think, he considered, I think the object on the third floor is connected to Voldemort. The Philosopher's Stone, Sirius said. Harry looked at him. Flamel, Sirius said. Nicholas Flamel is the only person who could have produced something worth that level of protection in August of this year. And Flamel's stone is the only object I can think of that would interest both Dumbledore and Voldemort simultaneously. He paused. Dumbledore keeps the stone at Hogwarts. Voldemort, who is not fully dead, I agree with you on that, comes for the stone. Dumbledore responds. In that confrontation, perhaps certain medical emergencies occur. Perhaps a boy gets injured. He looked at Harry directly. Do you see? Harry saw. He saw it completely, the elegant structure of it, a trap with multiple uses, the stone as bait drawing Voldemort and the confrontation creating the situation Moss had warned him against. The scenario that would put Harry unconscious in the headmaster's care. He doesn't need to plan it explicitly, Harry said slowly. He just needs to create the conditions. Let the situation develop. And trust that a 12-year-old, Sirius started. 11, Harry said. An 11-year-old will go after the stone if he thinks someone else is getting it, Sirius said. He knows your parents. He'd know you'd go. Harry thought about that honestly. 6 months ago, maybe. 6 months ago before the vault and the letter and the library and all the long evenings of building the case with Hermione and Neville, maybe he would have reacted instead of planned. Maybe he would have gone running down to the third floor on pure instinct. He's working from an outdated model of who I am, Harry said. Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was, Harry thought, the first real unguarded smile he'd seen from him, the smile of someone who had been James Potter's best friend and was looking at the thing James Potter had made and finding it recognizable in the best possible way. Yes, he said. I think he is. Harry went back to Hogwarts on the 27th and walked through the school's great doors and felt the feywork in the foundations greet him with its steady note, and he stood in the entrance hall for a moment just receiving it, calibrating. Something had changed. Not in the school's magic exactly, the foundational work was the same, constant and deep. Something in the quality of the layer over it. The more recent magic, the human wizarding work laid on top of Salander's foundations. It felt tighter. More deliberate. As if in the days Harry had been away, someone had been in the school checking and adjusting the working they had built there. He stood very still and let his other sense map it. The third floor. The tightened warding was specifically around the third floor, with a density that hadn't been quite so pronounced before Christmas. Someone had reinforced whatever was up there. Someone who was responding to the changed conditions, the legal filings, Sirius's release, the tightening of the noose around the project, by pulling the plan forward. Harry went to find Hermione. She was in the library, which was where he'd expected her to be, at their table, with 6 books open and the particular expression of someone who has been building a picture and has just found the piece that makes it coherent. She looked up when he sat down and said, without preamble, the stone. The Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Yes. Sirius worked it out too. Third floor. Dumbledore moved it here in August. I found the procurement record, Hermione said, and turned one of her books so he could see, not a book exactly but a bound record of library acquisitions and special collections movements, the kind of administrative document that lived in the restricted section and that she had apparently convinced the school's feywork to let her access on the basis of being Harry's ally, which the school had apparently decided was sufficient reason. There's a specific movement record for July 31st this year, a high-security item transferred from Gringotts to Hogwarts. The record doesn't name the object but it lists the protective detail as maximum category. Harry looked at it. The date. July 31st. His birthday. His 11th birthday, the same day the Hogwarts letters had started arriving. He moved it on the same day he started sending the letters, Harry said. Hermione's jaw was set in the way that meant she was furious and being systematic about it. He moved the stone to Hogwarts the day he triggered the invitation sequence, she said. He set both things in motion simultaneously. The stone as the lure for Voldemort, and the letters as the mechanism to get you here. She paused. He had the whole thing built before you even knew you were a wizard. Harry looked at the record for a moment. Quirrell, he said. What about him? He's been wrong since the start of term. There's something underneath his surface that's cold and purposeful and pointed, and it has been getting more focused since the letters started, since I arrived. He paused. Quirrell is Voldemort's current host, or his current vehicle. He's here for the stone. And Dumbledore knows he's here. Hermione looked at him. Dumbledore knows there's a Voldemort-possessed teacher in his school. Yes. And he hasn't removed him. Harry looked at the library's high ceiling. Because he needs Quirrell to make the attempt. He needs the crisis to be real. He paused. How much does Quirrell know about me? About what I am? If Voldemort is in him, he'd know what Voldemort knows, Hermione said. Which is, probably not the full picture. Voldemort knew you survived. He may know something about the blood magic involved in that survival. But Fey bloodline detail, unlikely, Harry said. Voldemort didn't study Fey theory. He found it below his interest. He paused. Which means Quirrell Voldemort is coming for the stone and doesn't have a plan that involves me specifically. That's his plan, and Dumbledore's plan are not the same plan. Hermione was writing. What's Dumbledore's plan in this scenario? Quirrell attempts the stone. Fails, probably. The protections are designed to be challenging. I either go down there on instinct trying to stop him, or Dumbledore creates a situation that brings me down there. Confrontation occurs. I get hurt. He paused. Or I go down there and deal with it myself on my own terms, before Dumbledore can create the conditions he needs. Hermione put her pen down and looked at him directly. Harry. You cannot go down to the 3rd floor alone. I wasn't planning alone, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Neville. And Ron, Harry said. Yes. When? Harry thought about the tightened warding. About the timeline. About the treaty violation case filing in January. About Dumbledore looking at him across the Great Hall at dinner with that warm, patient, recalibrating attention. Soon, Harry said. Before he has to do something overt. He paused. I want to remove the variable. I want Voldemort dealt with so that Dumbledore can't use him as a mechanism. You want to deal with Voldemort, Hermione said. She said it very precisely, in the tone of someone checking that they have heard what they think they heard. He's in Quirrell, Harry said. He doesn't have a body. He's weak. He's a parasite that's been living on the back of someone else's head for however long. If I can separate him from Quirrell, I can. He paused, thinking through the mechanism that Salander's book had given him, the architecture of the ward-severing working that could, he believed, apply to certain other kinds of anchoring. I think I can dissipate him. At his current level of existence. Not permanently, but enough. He paused. Enough to remove him as a factor in this specific situation. Hermione was quiet for a long time. You've thought through the mechanism, she said. Yes. Walk me through it. He walked her through it. She asked 11 questions, 6 of which were very good, 2 of which identified assumptions he hadn't examined, and 3 of which he couldn't fully answer but which she then answered herself, which was one of the specific things about Hermione Granger that he valued most. She asked questions not to receive answers but to generate them. At the end she said, the mechanism is theoretically sound. She said it like a judge delivering a verdict. The application to a non-corporeal entity attached to a living host is, untested, but the logic holds. A pause. If you're wrong about the application, it won't work. It won't hurt you, it just won't work. If it doesn't work, Harry said, I have several backup approaches. Of course you do, Hermione said. They sat in the library in the gray January morning light with books spread around them and the school's steady note underneath everything like a heartbeat, and Harry thought about what Sirius had said, he's working from an outdated model of who you are. Dumbledore had built a trap for the Harry Potter he thought he'd created, managed, isolated, uninformed, instinct-driven, young enough to be maneuvered. He'd been careful and patient and had worked for 11 years and the trap was elegant and real. He'd just built it for the wrong person. They went on a Thursday night in January. The four of them, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Ron, with the invisibility cloak that Sirius had sent with a note that said your father would want you to have this, I should have given it to you sooner, stop doing heroic things without adequate coverage. Harry had written back, I'm not planning on heroics. I'm planning on efficiency. Sirius's reply had been 2 words, same thing. The third-floor corridor was longer than it looked from the locked door end, and the smell that came through when Harry opened the door with the school's Feywork cooperating was something old and alive and distinctly not dog. What was in the room beyond was a dog, technically, in the way that a thunderstorm is technically weather, a 3-headed dog of enormous proportions that was, when they entered, asleep. Not naturally asleep. Asleep in the specific way of something that had been put to sleep recently and from the outside, by someone who had come this way before them. Quirrell was here first, Neville said, very quietly. Yes, Harry said. He looked at the dog, all 3 of its heads, breathing in heavy slow synchrony, and felt for the trapdoor underneath. We need to move. He has a head start. The trapdoor led to the devil's snare, which Harry walked through with the particular quality of someone moving through something that has no purchase on him. The plant's tendrils reached for him and found, in the specific frequency of his magic, something they recognized as belonging to the same old order they were part of, and let go. Hermione spoke a light charm and Neville murmured something to the plant in a quiet specific way that Harry thought was instinctive old magic communication rather than any formal spell, and it released them all. The keys were a swarm of flutter-winged enchanted objects that required a broomstick and a specific one to be caught, which Ron identified with a lateral eye for pattern that was genuinely impressive. He caught it in 3 passes. The chess set was the one that stopped them. Not stopped them exactly, the pieces moved at Harry's direction with the same automatic cooperation the school's magic extended to everything he engaged with, the board responding to him the way the library gate had responded, the way the vault had responded. He walked across it without taking a piece and the board let him. But Ron caught his arm. The way it's set up, Ron said, looking at the board with the absorbed lateral attention he gave anything game-shaped, is to be played through. Someone who came this way before, Quirrell, they had to play it. You can see the pieces that were moved. White's lost its queen and 2 rooks and moved the king. He paused. It was set up to require sacrifice. Whoever came through made an exchange. Harry looked at the board and saw what Ron saw. He sacrificed himself, he said. He played himself through and took hits to pass. Quirrell doesn't care about Quirrell, Ron said. Voldemort doesn't care about the host. He looked at Harry. Something to know going in. Yes, Harry said. Thank you. He looked at the board more carefully. Can you take us through faster than Quirrell went? Without a sacrifice? Ron looked at the pieces. He was already calculating, head tilted, the complete focus of someone who has played 10,000 chess games and sees board states the way other people see rooms. Give me 30 seconds, he said. He took 25. The route he found was elegant, 3 moves, using the existing gaps in the white arrangement that Quirrell's play had created, exploiting the black side's partial commitment to a strategy that assumed white would play conventionally. Ron directed each of them through with quick precise instructions and the pieces let them pass, and when they reached the other side he looked back at the board with the expression of someone who has done something he's satisfied with. Good, Harry said. Ron shrugged. It's just chess. It's never just chess, Harry said. It's always the thing you're best at applied to the thing in front of you. That's what you're best at. He paused. Don't let anyone tell you differently. Ron looked slightly startled by this. Then he straightened. Right, he said. Let's go. The potions room was bottles and logic, and Hermione read the riddle in 45 seconds and identified the correct bottles in another 20 and said, forward and back both possible. I should go back with Neville and Ron. Why? Neville said. Because whatever is happening in there, she gestured at the door beyond, Harry needs to happen without an audience that might complicate the situation. And because someone needs to go back and tell Sirius and McGonagall where we are. She paused. Now. That second thing is the most important one. Harry looked at her. She was entirely right on both counts, and she knew she was, and she was also, he could feel clearly, frightened and not letting the fright be the loudest thing in the room. He thought of everything she'd done since September, the notebooks, the legal architecture, the questions that generated answers, the flat precision with which she'd named every ugly thing in this business without flinching. Thank you, he said. For all of it. Thank me when you're back, she said. Go. He went through the door. The final chamber was lit with purple flames and smelled like stone and old magic and something else, something sour and wrong that was the smell of Voldemort's presence in a body it wasn't meant to occupy. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror of Erised with his back to the door, and Harry felt, immediately, the way a small room feels when you're reading the emotional landscape of it, that Quirrell couldn't get what he needed from the mirror. That the mirror was refusing him. He also felt the sheer wrongness of the thing on the back of Quirrell's head, the cold purposeful presence that was not Quirrell at all, ancient and reduced and furious in the specific way of something that has been diminished and cannot accept the diminishment. Harry Potter, Quirrell said, turning. His voice was not his own anymore. The stutter was gone, and what was there instead was colder and more precise. I wondered when you would arrive. I'm here to collect the stone, Harry said. Not for you. For safekeeping. The headmaster's arrangement has become a liability. Quirrell, Voldemort, looked at him with Quirrell's eyes, which were wrong in the way of a borrowed thing used past its tolerance. The stone is mine, it said. Stand aside. No, Harry said simply. He was feeling his way into the working he'd designed in his head over the last 2 weeks, the word-severing principle from Salander's book applied to a non-corporeal entity's anchoring in a living host. The logic held, the Fey blood application to unbinding was clean in theory. He was about to find out how it held in practice. You cannot stop me, Voldemort said. Harry looked at him without fear. Without aggression. With the same quality of attention he brought to every difficult thing, clear and complete and entirely without performance. Here's what I know about you, Harry said. You're not in a body. You're in his body, and it's failing under you because you're not what it was built for. You have about 30% of the power you had before 1981, and what you're trying to do right now you can't do because the mirror won't give the stone to someone whose desire is impure. He paused. You need me, or you need to destroy me, and either way you need to touch me, which you won't be able to do. That's a remarkable claim from a child. Touch me and find out, Harry said. Voldemort directed Quirrell forward. The moment Quirrell's hand came within a foot of Harry, Harry released the working he'd been building, a careful, specific unbinding, one thread at a time, the Fey resonant magic working along the exact frequency of Voldemort's attachment to Quirrell's body the way a key works in a lock. The effect was not dramatic. That was the thing about it that surprised him slightly. He'd been prepared for something explosive, some battle of magics, some visible confrontation. Instead it was quiet. The unbinding worked like pulling a splinter. Careful. Direct. Precise. Voldemort's presence in Quirrell's body had been holding on by specific points of attachment, specific anchoring to the host's nervous system and magical core, and Harry severed each one with the same steady patience he brought to everything. Quirrell screamed. Fell. The purple flames leapt. The presence that had been Voldemort came loose of the body it had been inhabiting and hung in the room like smoke for a terrible moment. Harry felt it, distinct and cold and ancient and reduced, looking at him with what was left of its attention, and he felt it trying to reconstitute, trying to find another anchor, anything, the urgency of something that cannot survive without a host. He pushed it. Not with violence. With the same directional clarity he'd applied to everything else, he pushed it toward dispersal the way you push fog with warm air, not fighting it but simply removing the conditions it needed to exist. His Fey-resonant magic filled the room with a warmth that the cold of Voldemort's presence could not persist alongside, and the presence thinned, and frayed, and after a long moment, perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a minute, time moving strangely, went out. Not permanently. He knew that. Whatever Voldemort was, he'd proven twice now that he could survive near destruction, and this had been even less decisive than the first time. He was gone from this room, from this body, from this year. Dispersed enough to be irrelevant for the foreseeable future. The mirror stood against the wall, quiet and waiting. Harry walked to it and looked into it. He saw himself, just himself, clear-eyed and present, standing exactly where he was standing, with the stone appearing in his pocket as he watched himself reach for it. He felt the weight of it materialize in his jacket pocket, real and solid and warm in the specific way of Flamel's life's work. The mirror gave it to him without drama. He pocketed it. Quirrell was unconscious on the floor, breathing, alive. He was going to need significant medical attention and would almost certainly retain no memory of the last several months. Harry looked at him for a moment, a man who had been used past his capacity and had not chosen this and was going to have to live with the aftermath of it. He left him there for the teachers to find, which they would do quickly because Hermione had gone back to tell them, and he walked back through the chambers, the potions, the chess room with Ron's route still visible in the piece positions, the keys, the devil's snare, and back up through the trapdoor and past the sleeping three-headed dog and out into the third-floor corridor and up the stairs toward the inhabited warmth of the school above. The school's Feywork sang its steady note around him. Recognized. Named. Welcome. He had the stone in his pocket. Voldemort was dispersed. The legal cases were filed. Sirius was free. Pettigrew was in Ministry custody. The record existed. There was one thing left. He went to find McGonagall.